The Force binds all things across the galaxy, connecting every living being in an invisible web of energy that flows through stars, planets, and the void between them. For millennia, the Jedi had served as guardians of this mystical power, until the dark times came and the Empire rose from the ashes of the Old Republic. Now, the Force itself seemed diminished, its light side practitioners scattered or dead, while the dark side flourished under the tyranny of the Sith. But the Force, for all its cosmic significance, was not the only power in existence. Beyond the edges of this galaxy, in dimensions the Sith Lords had never dreamed of exploring, other energies thrived, ancient, structured, and entirely independent of midichlorians. Magic. And on this particular day, magic was about to collide with the Star Wars galaxy in a way that would shake the very foundations of the conflict between Empire and Rebellion. Harry Potter had not meant to leave his universe. The experimental research in the Department of Mysteries had seemed straightforward enough, investigating the veil's dimensional properties, mapping the threshold between life and death that had claimed his godfather so many years ago. As head Auror and a consultant for the unspeakables, Harry had access to the most dangerous magical artifacts in the wizarding world. The veil had always haunted him, whispered to him, called to him with voices of the dead. Understanding it felt like unfinished business, a mystery that demanded solving. The ritual was supposed to be contained, controlled, safe. It was none of those things. The veil had opened wider than ever before, its tattered curtain splitting reality itself, and the pulling force became a screaming vacuum that no shield charm could resist. Harry's wand hand shot forward instinctively, casting every defensive spell he knew, but magic itself seemed to bend toward the rift. The last thing he remembered was his fingers closing around the Elder Wand as the world inverted, twisted, and then shattered into a kaleidoscope of impossible colors. When Harry opened his eyes, he was falling. Not the gentle descent of a levitation charm gone wrong, but a genuine, screaming through atmosphere fall that reminded him viscerally of his Triwizard Tournament plunge into the lake. Except this time, there was no water below, only endless desert that stretched to every horizon under twin suns that burned with foreign, hostile heat. His survival instincts, honed through years of facing death, kicked in immediately. Arresto momentum. The spell erupted from his wand in a flash of light, and his velocity decreased dramatically, though not entirely. He still hit the sand hard enough to knock the breath from his lungs, tumbling across scorching dunes in a cloud of dust and displaced grit. For several long moments, Harry lay still, staring up at a sky that was undeniably, impossibly wrong. 2 suns. He blinked, certain he was seeing double from the impact, but no, 2 distinct solar bodies hung overhead, casting double shadows across the alien landscape. The air tasted different too, dry beyond anything he'd experienced even in Egypt during Cursebreaker missions with Bill Weasley. This wasn't just another country or even another planet in his own universe. This was somewhere else entirely. Harry forced himself to his feet, automatically checking his person with the practiced efficiency of an Auror who'd survived too many ambushes. Wand, still in his right hand, slightly warm from the spell casting. The Elder Wand had survived the journey intact. His invisibility cloak remained tucked in his jacket's enchanted pocket, and the Resurrection Stone was secure in its hiding place. His wand holster, various potion vials, emergency port key, likely useless now, and his Auror badge were all present. Everything else about his situation was completely, catastrophically unknown. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions. No landmarks. No signs of civilization. No magical signature he recognized. Even the ambient magic felt absent. Not suppressed like in Muggle areas, but genuinely not present, as if magic itself didn't exist in this place. Yet his spells still worked, the Arresto momentum had proven that. So magic functioned, but the world didn't generate it naturally. That was deeply concerning. A distant mechanical roar caught his attention. Harry's head snapped toward the sound, and his eyes widened as something emerged from the heat shimmer on the horizon. Not a dragon or a thestral or even a flying car. This was a vehicle of some kind, angular and industrial, hovering above the sand on visible repulsor technology that had no magical explanation whatsoever. It moved with purpose, closing the distance rapidly. Harry's wand came up instinctively, and he cast a disillusionment charm on himself, the sensation of a cold egg breaking over his head accompanying the spell. His form blurred, chameleon-like, blending with the desert background. He held perfectly still as the vehicle, some kind of patrol speeder, he realized, circled his impact crater. Two figures dismounted. They wore white armor that covered them head to toe, carrying weapons that definitely weren't wands. The weapons had a brutal, mechanical efficiency to them, all hard angles and visible power cells. Blasters, some corner of Harry's mind supplied, though he had no idea how he knew the word. "Command, this is DS-5-5-7, one of the armored figures spoke into a communication device. His voice was filtered, emotionless, identical to his companion's. "We've located the energy signature source. Impact crater consistent with atmospheric entry. No debris field. No ship wreckage. Recommend investigation team." "Acknowledged, DS-5-5-7, a woman's voice crackled back through the comm, "maintain position. The Inquisitor is en route." Harry's breath caught. Inquisitor. That word carried weight even across dimensional barriers, the same kind of weight that Death Eater once held. These weren't mere guards or soldiers. They were hunters, and someone had sent them to find whoever, had fallen from the sky. The armored soldiers began scanning the area with handheld devices that beeped and chirped in response to something. One of them stopped less than 3 meters from where Harry stood invisible, the scanner's frequency increasing. Residual energy detected. Fluctuating between sensor bands. It's not matching any known propulsion signature or weapon discharge. Could be rebel tech, the other soldier suggested. New prototype. Or something else. Stay alert. Harry weighed his options with the calculated calm of someone who'd faced Voldemort and lived. He could apparate away, except he had no idea where away was, and splinching himself in an unknown desert seemed like a spectacularly bad idea. He could stun these soldiers and take one for questioning, but that would reveal his presence and capabilities immediately. He could wait and observe, learning more about wherever the hell he'd landed before making himself known. The decision was made for him when a third presence arrived. This one didn't come by speeder. A sleek, black ship descended from the sky with predatory grace, its wings folding upward as it settled onto the sand with barely a whisper of displaced air. The boarding ramp lowered, and a figure emerged that made every one of Harry's threat assessment instincts scream warnings. She was tall, dressed in dark armor that mixed elements of the soldier's white plates with something more archaic, almost medieval. A cape flowed behind her, and at her side hung a weapon that made Harry's blood run cold, a cylindrical hilt attached to her belt, clearly a weapon, dormant but radiating danger. Her face was pale, sharp-featured, with yellow eyes that seemed to pierce through the desert's glare. And there was something around her. Not magic, but something else. An energy, a presence that pressed against the world like a physical force. It reminded Harry of the way powerful wizards could affect a room's atmosphere, except this felt more primal, more connected to life itself. "Report," she commanded, her voice cold and absolute. "Inquisitor," both soldiers snapped to attention. Energy surge detected at these coordinates. Impact crater, no ship remains. Unknown technology signature. The woman, the Inquisitor, walked directly toward Harry's position. Those yellow eyes swept across the sand, across the crater, across the space where Harry stood invisible. For one terrible moment, he was certain she could see him. Her hand moved to the weapon at her belt. "There's something here," she said quietly. "Something I've never felt before. Not the Force, but," her fingers drummed against the weapon's hilt. "Powerful. Hiding." Harry made a decision. He'd hidden enough in his life, and it had rarely ended well. Besides, he needed information, and these people clearly had it. He dropped the disillusionment charm, appearing in a shimmer of displaced light directly in front of the Inquisitor. To her credit, she didn't flinch. The weapon was in her hand and ignited in one smooth motion, a blade of pure red energy that hummed with barely contained violence. A lightsaber, Harry's mind supplied again, that strange knowledge appearing unbidden. The soldiers' blasters came up immediately, targeting Harry from two angles. "Don't move," one soldier barked. Harry raised his left hand slowly, peacefully, while keeping his wand hand carefully visible but non-threatening at his side. "I'm not here to fight," he said clearly, projecting calm despite the weapon of coherent plasma pointed at his chest. "I don't know where I am. I don't know how I got here. But I'm not your enemy." The Inquisitor's eyes narrowed, studying him with predatory intensity. "You're no Jedi. I sense no force within you. Yet the energy signature that brought us here emanates from your position." She gestured with the lightsaber. "What are you?" Harry met her gaze steadily, seeing the calculation there, the threat assessment, the decision being made about whether he lived or died in the next 30 seconds. He'd seen that look before in the eyes of Death Eaters, in Voldemort's scarlet stare, in the faces of dark wizards who measured human life in terms of utility and threat. He knew how to handle people like this. Respect their power, but never show fear. "My name is Harry Potter," he said. "And I'm a wizard." The Inquisitor's lightsaber didn't waver, but something shifted in her expression, curiosity, perhaps, or the recognition that she'd found something unprecedented. "A wizard," she repeated slowly, as if testing the word. "The Empire will be very interested in you, Harry Potter." Behind her, one of the soldiers spoke into his command, "We have the target. One individual, unknown species or force tradition. Requesting transport for Imperial interrogation." Harry's grip on the Elder Wand tightened slightly. Interrogation. He'd been through that before too, had the scars and the nightmares to prove it. And he'd sworn, after the war ended, that he'd never let anyone chain him again, never let anyone make him a prisoner, never stop fighting for his freedom. But this wasn't his world. These weren't Death Eaters. And something told him that revealing the full extent of his power right now would be a mistake that cost him any chance of understanding where he was and how to get home. So Harry Potter, master of death, veteran of a wizarding war, and the boy who lived, did something he'd gotten rather good at over the years. He waited, watched, and began planning his escape. If you want to see more characters enter the Star Wars galaxy, hit that subscribe button and drop the name of a character you'd want to see in the comments below. May the Force be with you. The Imperial transport ship was nothing like the Hogwarts Express or even the night bus. It was cold, sterile, and utterly devoid of any personality beyond brutal efficiency. Harry sat in the detention cell with his hands secured in binders that hummed with energy, not magic suppressing, he determined immediately, but designed to deliver a painful shock if he moved too suddenly or attempted to separate his wrists. His wand had been confiscated, naturally. The Inquisitor had handled the Elder Wand with cautious reverence, clearly sensing something significant about it even if she couldn't identify what. That was a problem. A significant one. Through the transparent section of his cell, Harry watched the desert of Tatooine. He'd overheard the name from the soldiers, recede as the transport climbed toward orbit. The twin suns shrank to brilliant points, and then the ship made a jump that felt nothing like apparition or portkey travel. Space itself seemed to twist, stars stretching into lines of light, and suddenly they were elsewhere. Moving faster than light, apparently, through something called hyperspace. Magic had prepared Harry for many impossible things, but casual faster-than-light travel wasn't one of them. The Inquisitor stood outside his cell, watching him with those unsettling yellow eyes. She hadn't introduced herself, but the soldiers called her Seventh Sister when they thought she wasn't listening. She'd been studying him for the past hour, occasionally asking questions that Harry deflected or answered with careful half-truths. "You claim to be a wizard," she said for the third time, her tone suggesting she was testing his consistency. "Yet you carry no force presence. Every force-sensitive being in the galaxy radiates power that can be felt, measured, identified. You are empty. A void. Yet you appeared from nowhere, and the energy surge that preceded your arrival registered across half the sector. Harry leaned back against the cell wall, projecting calm he didn't entirely feel. I've explained this. Magic and your force appear to be different things. Where I come from, we manipulate magic through will, knowledge, and focus. It's not internal, it's external energy we shape and direct. Demonstrate, the seventh sister commanded. You took my wand. You can't perform this magic without a tool. Her lip curled slightly. The force requires no such crutch. A true force wielder commands power through their connection to the cosmic energy that binds all living things. Harry smiled thinly. I can perform magic without my wand. It's just more difficult, less precise. But I'm not particularly inclined to demonstrate my capabilities while I'm a prisoner. He met her gaze steadily. Where I'm from, we have a saying, constant vigilance. It means never reveal your full strength to potential enemies. Something flickered across her face, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a kindred tactical mind. Wise. But pointless. You will demonstrate your abilities, Harry Potter. If not for me, then for Lord Vader. And he is far less patient than I am. The name sent a chill down Harry's spine, though he couldn't explain why. Lord Vader, he repeated carefully. Should that name mean something to me? The seventh sister's expression shifted to something almost pitying. If you truly are from beyond this galaxy, then perhaps not. But you'll learn. Everyone learns to fear Darth Vader eventually. She turned away from the cell. We'll be arriving at the Imperial garrison on Eriadu in 2 hours. I suggest you prepare yourself. The interrogation droids are quite effective at extracting information from even the most stubborn subjects. Harry watched her leave, his mind racing through scenarios. He'd escaped worse situations, the Department of Mysteries, Malfoy Manor, Voldemort's graveyard trap. But those had been in a world where he understood the rules, knew the players, could predict the threats. Here, he was operating blind, every piece of information precious and potentially life-saving. The binders around his wrists hummed their warning as he shifted position, testing their limits. The energy field responded to movement, not magic. That was exploitable. Harry closed his eyes and reached for his magic, feeling it respond immediately, warm and familiar in this cold, alien environment. Without his wand, wandless magic would be crude and exhausting, but he'd managed it before when desperate. A simple unlocking charm would be too obvious, would alert his captors immediately. But there were subtler applications. He focused on the binder's internal mechanism, feeling for the magnetic locks that held it closed, and applied gentle magical pressure. Not enough to spring it open, just enough to weaken the field, to stress the components gradually. It would take time. But time was something he could manufacture. Accio, he whispered, barely a breath, directing the spell toward where he sensed his wand, somewhere deeper in the ship, likely in a secured storage area. The spell stretched out, searching, but met resistance almost immediately. Distance was a factor in wandless magic, and the ship was larger than it appeared. He'd need to be closer. The transport shuddered slightly as it dropped out of hyperspace, and through the viewport, Harry saw a planet materialize, gray and industrial, wrapped in clouds that looked more like pollution than weather. Eriadu, he presumed. The ship descended through atmospheric entry, and Harry watched cities spread below, massive urban centers connected by elevated transport lanes where speeders moved in organized streams. It reminded him of London, if London had been rebuilt by people who'd never heard of trees, parks, or anything approaching natural beauty. The landing was smooth, professional, and Harry was immediately escorted from his cell by 4 soldiers, stormtroopers, he'd heard them called, who kept their weapons trained on him at all times. The seventh sister led the procession through corridors that were all the same sterile gray, past other soldiers who saluted her with mechanical precision, into a facility that screamed military installation in every detail. They entered an interrogation chamber that made Harry's memories of Umbridge's detention and the Cruciatus Curse feel almost quaint by comparison. The room was dominated by a chair with far too many restraints and a spider-like droid that descended from the ceiling, multiple syringes and scanning devices extending from its appendages like the legs of some mechanical nightmare. "Secure the prisoner," the seventh sister ordered. Harry moved before they could touch him. The weakened binders snapped apart with a burst of wandless magic, and he threw himself sideways as blaster bolts scorched the air where he'd been standing. "Protego!" The shield charm erupted around him, shimmering and translucent, and the next volley of blaster fire splashed harmlessly against the magical barrier. The stormtroopers hesitated, clearly unprepared for this development. The seventh sister, however, didn't hesitate at all. Her lightsaber ignited with a snap hiss, and she moved with speed that matched any dueling champion Harry had faced. The red blade struck his shield charm, and to Harry's shock, it didn't deflect or absorb. It cut through, slicing into the magical energy like a hot knife through butter. Harry rolled backward, ending the shield and casting instead Expelliarmus. The disarming charm shot toward the Inquisitor in a jet of scarlet light, but she twisted aside with reflexes that seemed almost prescient. The spell missed her by centimeters and struck a stormtrooper instead, sending his blaster flying and throwing him backward into the wall. Stupefy. Petrificus totalis. Impedimenta. Harry fired off spells in rapid succession, his wandless magic less precise but still effective at close range. 2 more stormtroopers went down, one frozen mid-step, another stunned unconscious. The interrogation droid exploded in a shower of sparks as a blasting curse caught its center mass. The seventh sister was the real threat. She moved through his spellfire like a dancer, the lightsaber spinning in defensive patterns that intercepted or deflected most of his attacks. The few that got through, a tripping jinx that she somehow anticipated, a stunning spell she literally batted aside with her weapon, demonstrated that she was operating on an entirely different level than the soldiers. "Impressive," she said, not even breathing hard. "But inadequate." She thrust her free hand forward, and Harry felt something grab him, not physically, but with invisible force that seized his chest and throat like a giant's fist. He was lifted off his feet, gasping, clawing at nothing as the pressure increased. This wasn't magic as he knew it. This was that other energy he'd sensed around her, turned into a weapon. "The Force is more than your parlor tricks," the seventh sister said coldly, walking toward him as he struggled in her telekinetic grip. "It is the power of life and death itself. You are strong, wizard, but you are no match for." Harry's hand found his enchanted pocket, and his fingers closed around something small, hard, and very illegal in most civilized magical societies. Peruvian instant darkness powder. He hurled it downward with the last of his strength, and the room exploded into absolute, impenetrable blackness that even the interrogation chamber's lights couldn't pierce. The telekinetic grip vanished as the seventh sister's concentration broke. Harry hit the ground, already moving, casting a disillusionment charm and a silencing charm on himself simultaneously. He couldn't apparate, didn't know where he'd end up, might splinch himself in an unfamiliar building's walls, but he could disappear. Blaster fire lit up the darkness randomly, panicked shots from the remaining stormtroopers. The seventh sister's voice cut through the chaos, "Cease fire, you fools. He's still in the room. Seal all exits." Harry was already at the door. The locking mechanism was electronic, not magical, but he'd dealt with Muggle technology before. Alohomora. The spell sparked against the lock, incompatible with the technology but disruptive enough to fry something important. The door slid open partially, just enough. He slipped through into the corridor beyond, still invisible and silent, his heart hammering against his ribs. Alarms began blaring throughout the facility. More stormtroopers appeared at both ends of the corridor, sealing it off. Harry pressed himself against the wall as they rushed past him toward the interrogation chamber, their attention focused inward. He needed his wand. Needed information. Needed a way off this planet and back to his own universe. But first, he needed to not be captured. Harry moved through the facility like a ghost, following the pull of his magic toward where he sensed the Elder Wand. The garrison was massive, a warren of identical corridors and chambers that all looked the same. He passed briefing rooms where officers discussed patrol routes, armories stocked with enough weapons to wage a war, hangar bays holding sleek starfighters that made broomsticks look primitive. And everywhere, there were soldiers. So many soldiers. An army that made Voldemort's Death Eaters look like a small gang of thugs. Harry found the evidence locker on the third sublevel, guarded by 2 stormtroopers and a security system that scanned for something. Life signs, maybe, or that force energy. He waited until a group of soldiers rushed past responding to the alerts, then slipped through the door in their wake. Inside, secured in an evidence field, was the Elder Wand. Harry dismissed his disillusionment charm and thrust his hand into the containment field, ignoring the burning sensation as it resisted his intrusion. His fingers closed around familiar wood, and the moment he touched it, power flooded back through him. The Elder Wand recognized its master, resonated with his magic, and the containment field shattered outward in a pulse of golden light. There. A stormtrooper appeared in the doorway, weapon raised. Harry turned, wand up, no longer interested in subtlety or restraint. Stupefy. The spell caught the soldier square in the chest, dropping him instantly. Another trooper appeared behind the first. Petrificus totalis. Frozen solid. A third tried to call for backup. Silencio. Incarcerus. Ropes burst from Harry's wand, binding the soldier thoroughly. An alarm shrieked directly overhead, and Harry knew his time had run out. The 7th sister would be coming, probably with reinforcements. He needed an exit, needed transportation, needed. His eyes fell on a datapad sitting on one of the evidence tables, its screen displaying something that made his breath catch. A star map. Locations marked throughout what the display labeled the Outer Rim. And one location highlighted with particular interest, Tatooine. Mos Eisley. A cantina where smugglers and pilots congregated, where someone desperate enough might find transport off-world. Harry memorized the details in the 3 seconds before the door exploded inward and the 7th sister rushed through, her lightsaber already ignited and murder in her yellow eyes. "You're beginning to annoy me, wizard," she hissed. Harry smiled grimly, wand leveled, magic singing through his veins. Good. I'd hate to think I was boring. The duel that followed was unlike anything Harry had experienced in his own world. The 7th sister moved with preternatural speed and precision, her lightsaber carving glowing arcs through the air as she pressed her attack. Harry gave ground strategically, casting rapid-fire spells that forced her to defend rather than advance. Stunning spells splashed against walls where she'd been a heartbeat before. Binding curses were severed by that impossible blade. A blasting curse actually connected, exploding against her shoulder armor, but she rolled with the impact and came up attacking. Bombarda. Harry destroyed a support column, bringing part of the ceiling down between them. Debris rained across the evidence locker, buying him precious seconds. He blasted open the exterior wall with another explosion, revealing the garrison compound beyond, open air, landing pads, and most critically, parked speeders. He ran. Blaster fire chased him across the compound, bolts of superheated plasma that reminded him viscerally of killing curses in their lethality and speed. Harry's shield charm deflected some, but these weapons were designed to overwhelm defenses through sheer volume. He serpentined between cargo containers, using every evasion technique Moody had drilled into him during Aura training. A speeder sat unattended near a hangar entrance, sleek and military gray. Harry threw himself into the pilot's seat, wand pointed at the control console. He had no idea how to operate this vehicle. None whatsoever. But he'd figured out the Triwizard Dragon task with even less preparation. Incendio. A controlled flame burst from his wand, touching the ignition system. The speeder roared to life, repulsor engines humming with power. Harry gripped what he hoped were the controls and pushed forward experimentally. The speeder shot toward the compound wall at terrifying velocity. Brake, brake, brake. Harry yanked backward on the controls, and the speeder jerked to a hovering stop meters from impact. Behind him, stormtroopers poured from the garrison building, weapons raised. The seventh sister emerged from the hole Harry had blown in the wall, her expression absolutely murderous. Harry pointed his wand behind him without looking and cast the most powerful shield charm he could manage. The translucent barrier sprang into existence just as a volley of blaster fire converged on his position. The impacts created a light show of absorbed energy, the shield holding but weakening rapidly. He figured out the acceleration controls through sheer desperation, and the speeder lurched forward, gaining altitude as it cleared the compound wall. The city of Eriadu spread before him in all its industrial ugliness, factories belching smoke, elevated traffic lanes crisscrossing between towering structures, the constant hum of machinery and engines creating a symphony of mechanized civilization. Behind him, pursuit vehicles launched from the garrison. Smaller, more maneuverable speeders piloted by stormtroopers who actually knew what they were doing. Harry pushed his stolen vehicle higher, weaving between buildings as blaster fire streaked past. A bolt clipped his speeder's rear stabilizer, sending him into a brief spin that he corrected more through luck than skill. He needed to lose them, needed to find somewhere to hide, to think, to plan his next move. A massive transport freighter lumbered across his path, its cargo bay doors open as loading droids transferred containers. Harry didn't hesitate. He aimed his speeder directly at the opening and accelerated, shooting through the narrow gap with centimeters to spare. His pursuers tried to follow, but the freighter's loading procedures initiated automatically, the bay doors beginning to close. One Imperial speeder made it through. Two others crashed into the closing doors in spectacular fashion. Inside the cargo hold, Harry abandoned his speeder and scrambled behind a stack of containers marked with symbols he couldn't read. The pursuing stormtrooper dismounted, weapon raised, moving with tactical precision through the narrow aisles between cargo. Harry waited until the trooper passed his position, then struck. Expelliarmus. The blaster flew from the soldier's hands. Petrificus totalis. The trooper froze mid-turn, toppling backward stiff as a board. Harry caught him with a levitation charm, lowering him quietly behind the containers. He stripped off the stormtrooper's armor with hands that shook slightly from adrenaline. The white plates were lighter than they looked, some kind of plastoid composite rather than metal. Harry pulled on the pieces awkwardly, unused to this type of equipment. It fit poorly, the trooper had been taller, but it covered him, which was the point. The helmet was the strangest part. When Harry put it on, his vision shifted, multiple displays appearing at the edges of his sight showing what he assumed were targeting systems, communications channels, and environmental data. The audio filters made his breathing sound mechanical, alien. He felt disconnected from his own senses, relying on the helmet systems rather than his eyes and ears. But he looked like a stormtrooper now. That might buy him time. The freighter's engines rumbled, and Harry felt the deck shift beneath his feet as the massive ship lifted off. Through gaps between containers, he glimpsed the cargo bay doors fully sealed now, atmospheric pressure normalizing. The ship was leaving Eriadu, heading somewhere else. Harry didn't know where, but anywhere was better than the Imperial garrison. He settled in behind the containers, out of sight of any crew members who might wander through the hold, and finally allowed himself to breathe. His hands were still shaking. The adrenaline crash was hitting hard, bringing with it the stark realization of how close he'd come to capture, interrogation, or death. This wasn't his war. Wasn't his world. He had no stake in whatever conflict divided this galaxy, no obligation to its people or their struggles. His only goal should be finding a way home, back to his universe, back to the wizarding world where he understood the rules and knew his place. But he'd seen enough in the garrison to recognize tyranny when it confronted him. The way the stormtroopers moved with mechanical obedience, stripped of individual identity behind identical armor. The casual cruelty in the Seventh Sister's yellow eyes. The interrogation chamber designed not just to extract information but to break human spirits. He'd fought against this kind of darkness before, worn himself thin opposing it, nearly died a dozen times to stop it. And here he was, in a galaxy far from home, and darkness had apparently won. Harry pulled off the stormtrooper helmet, letting the recycled air of the cargo hold wash over his face. The Elder Wand rested securely in the armor's belt compartment, hidden but accessible. He needed to think strategically. Needed information. Needed allies, if such things existed in this Empire-dominated galaxy. The datapad he'd glimpsed in the evidence locker had mentioned rebels. Some kind of resistance movement opposing Imperial rule. That seemed like a logical place to start, if he could find them. But Harry had learned painful lessons about resistance movements during his own war. Not everyone fighting tyranny did so with noble intentions. Not every rebel was a hero. Sometimes people became the very thing they claimed to oppose. He'd need to evaluate carefully before committing to any faction. The freighter's journey lasted several hours, the engine's steady thrum creating a almost meditative background noise. Harry used the time to practice wandless magic, testing his limits now that he had the Elder Wand back. Simple spells came easily enough. Complex ones required more concentration, more precise wand movements. In a direct confrontation with that Inquisitor woman, or worse, this Lord Vader she'd mentioned, he'd need every advantage, every trick, every bit of skill he'd accumulated through years of survival. Eventually, the engines changed pitch, indicating atmospheric entry. Harry replaced the helmet and emerged from his hiding spot, moving confidently as if he belonged. The cargo bay was still largely empty of crew, the automated systems handling most of the landing procedures. When the bay doors opened, Harry's breath caught. The planet beyond was beautiful in a way Ariadu had not been. A massive city stretched to every horizon, but this was architecture as art form, elegant spires reaching toward a perpetual sunset sky, flowing curves rather than harsh angles, spaces that incorporated natural elements rather than eliminating them. Speeders moved in organized streams through the air, while platforms at various levels supported gardens, marketplaces, and gathering spaces where beings of species Harry couldn't name walked freely. A digital display near the bay doors identified their location, Coruscant. Galactic capital. Harry filed that information away. If this was the capital, it would be both dangerous and valuable. The heart of Imperial power, but also the place where he might find the most information, the most resources, the most opportunities to either escape this universe or understand it well enough to survive. He exited the freighter with a group of other workers, keeping his movements casual, his body language unremarkable. The stormtrooper armor was both disguise and liability. It granted him access to places civilians couldn't go, but also marked him as Imperial property, subject to orders and oversight. The lower levels of Coruscant were a maze of platforms, catwalks, and vertical streets that descended into shadowed depths where sunlight never reached. Harry made his way downward, following instinct more than knowledge, seeking the kind of places where questions could be asked and information bought without attracting official attention. He found what he was looking for in a district the locals called Level 1313, a name that apparently referred to its position in the city's vertical geography. Here, the elegant architecture of the upper levels gave way to industrial functionality and barely controlled chaos. Cantinas spilled drunken patrons onto streets where merchants hawked goods of questionable legality. Gang markings covered walls in multiple languages, territorial claims that the Imperial presence overhead seemed to ignore as long as violence stayed contained. Harry removed the stormtrooper armor in a shadowed alcove, transfiguring it into more anonymous clothing, brown jacket, dark pants, worn boots. The magic felt good, familiar, a reminder that he still had power in this strange new world. He kept the helmet, shrinking it and tucking it into an enchanted pocket. Never knew when a disguise might prove useful. The cantina he chose was called the Slippery Serpent, which seemed almost comically appropriate given his parseltongue abilities. Inside, the air was thick with smoke from substances he didn't recognize, and the patrons represented more alien species than Harry had ever imagined existed. Blue-skinned humanoids with head-tails. Furry creatures that looked vaguely like werewolves but moved with different mannerisms. Insectoid beings whose chittering conversation created background noise that set Harry's teeth on edge. He approached the bar carefully, aware of eyes tracking his movement. New faces were noticed in places like this. He'd learned that lesson in the Hog's Head and various other disreputable establishments during the war. The bartender was reptilian, scaled and cold-eyed, with 4 arms that moved independently as he prepared drinks. "What are you drinking, human?" Harry had no local currency, but he had something potentially more valuable. He pulled out a galleon, solid gold, marked with moving goblin-made engravings. "Information," he said quietly. "And whatever this buys." The bartender's eyes widened fractionally at the sight of pure gold. One hand scooped up the coin while another poured something amber into a glass. "Talk fast. Gold gets attention down here, and not the kind you want." "I'm looking for people who oppose the Empire," Harry said, pitching his voice low enough that only the bartender could hear over the cantina's noise. "Rebels. Resistance. Whatever they call themselves." The reptilian's expression became carefully neutral. "Dangerous talk, that. Empire's got eyes and ears everywhere. Then point me towards somewhere they don't." A long moment of consideration. Then, level 1782. Upper platforms. "There's a medical clinic run by a human woman named Ashera. She treats patients Imperial hospitals won't touch." The bartender slid the drink across the bar. "Word is, she's got connections. But I never said that, and you were never here." Harry nodded, understanding the rules of this game. He'd played similar ones in Nocturne Alley often enough. He tossed back the drink, it burned like fire whiskey but tasted of something spicy and alien, and turned to leave. A hand caught his shoulder. Heavy. Threatening. Harry turned slowly, wand concealed in his sleeve but ready. The being behind him was massive, easily 2.5 meters tall, with brown fur and a bandolier across his chest. His face was vaguely canine, with a pronounced muzzle, and when he growled, Harry saw very impressive teeth. "That was my seat, little human," the creature rumbled. Every other conversation in the cantina had stopped. This, apparently, was entertainment. Harry looked at the barstool he'd been standing near, then back at the furry giant, then at the dozen empty seats scattered throughout the establishment. His aura instincts screamed that this was a dominance play, a test, a challenge he could either submit to or confront. He'd never been good at submission. "Seems to me," Harry said calmly, "there are plenty of other seats. You're welcome to any of them." The creature's growl deepened, and his hand moved toward a weapon at his belt, something like a crossbow but mechanical, probably lethal. "I want that seat. And I want you to apologize. On your knees." Harry sighed. He was tired. He was lost. He was trapped in an alien universe with no clear path home. And he absolutely, definitively, did not have time for bullies. Flipendo. The spell emerged from his concealed wand as barely a whisper, but it hit the massive creature centermass with the force of a charging bull. The alien flew backward, crashing through a table and scattering its occupants in a spray of drinks and cards. The cantina exploded into chaos. The furry giant surged to his feet with a roar that rattled the cantina's windows, his crossbow weapon, a bowcaster, Harry's mind supplied, coming up to fire. Harry's shield charm materialized just as the weapon discharged, and the bolt of energy that struck it was unlike anything he'd deflected before. The impact drove him backward 3 steps, his boots scraping against the deck plating, the shield wavering under the kinetic force. Not just energy weapons, then. These were physical projectiles wrapped in plasma. Clever. The giant charged, and Harry abandoned the shield in favor of mobility. Impedimenta. The spell caught the creature mid-stride, slowing his movement to a crawl but not stopping him entirely. Whatever species this was had impressive resistance to magic, probably due to sheer physical mass and natural resilience. Other cantina patrons were drawing weapons now, some targeting Harry, others targeting each other in disputes that apparently only needed an excuse to erupt. A blaster bolt sizzled past Harry's ear, scorching the wall behind him. He ducked behind the bar as return fire lit up the space he'd just occupied. "Get out of my cantina," the reptilian bartender shrieked, all four arms gesturing frantically at the exits. Harry couldn't have agreed more. He scrambled along behind the bar toward a back exit, but two more aliens blocked his path, multi-eyed insectoids with mandibles that clicked menacingly. One lunged at him with claws extended. Stupefy. The stunning spell caught it square in its thorax region, and the creature crumpled. Its companion hissed and spat something acidic that Harry dodged by throwing himself sideways. The substance ate through the bar's metal surface with a horrifying sizzle. This was getting out of hand rapidly. Harry pointed his wand at the ceiling and cast with more power than precision. Bombarda Maxima. The explosion tore through the cantina's upper structure, bringing down fixtures, support beams, and a cascade of debris that created chaos and coverage in equal measure. He sprinted for the back exit through the confusion, spells flying behind him to discourage pursuit. The exit opened onto a narrow catwalk suspended over an impossibly deep chasm that descended into Coruscant's lower levels. The distance to the bottom was lost in shadows and industrial haze. Harry's stomach lurched at the sheer vertical drop. It made the Hogwarts staircases look like gentle slopes. Behind him, the cantina's rear wall exploded outward, and the furry giant emerged through the smoke and debris, bowcaster raised. He fired 3 times in rapid succession, and Harry's hastily cast shield charm shattered under the repeated impacts. The fourth bolt caught Harry's shoulder, spinning him around. The pain was immediate and excruciating. The plasma had seared through his transfigured jacket and burned his flesh beneath. Harry gritted his teeth against the agony and cast one of the few offensive spells he'd used during the war that he wasn't proud of. Sectum Sempra. The invisible slashing curse struck the giant across his torso, and blood sprayed. The creature howled in pain and rage, dropping his bowcaster to clutch at the wounds. Harry felt a familiar sick twist in his gut. He'd promised himself after the war that he'd never use Snape's curse again, but desperation had forced his hand. He turned and ran along the catwalk, his shoulder burning with every movement. Behind him, the sounds of pursuit continued, not just the injured giant, but others from the cantina who'd apparently decided that chasing the troublemaker was more profitable than returning to their drinks. The catwalk connected to a lift platform that was already descending. Harry jumped, landing hard on the moving surface, rolling to absorb the impact despite the screaming protest from his shoulder. The platform continued its automated descent into Coruscant's depths, carrying Harry away from his pursuers but also away from the surface, away from sunlight, away from any sense of safety. He allowed himself 30 seconds to catch his breath, then examined his shoulder wound. The burn was deep but cauterized by the plasma itself, no bleeding, but significant tissue damage. He fumbled in his pockets for a healing potion, found a small vial of dittany, and applied it directly to the wound. The magical essence stung worse than the initial injury, but he felt the flesh beginning to knit, the pain reducing from agony to a dull, manageable ache. The lift descended through level after level of Coruscant's vertical city. Harry watched the architecture change as he sank deeper, the elegant upper levels giving way to industrial platforms, then to outright slums where beings lived in conditions that reminded him viscerally of the worst parts of wizarding London's hidden poverty. Laundry hung between buildings. Children, or what he assumed were children of various species, played in streets slick with substances he didn't want to identify. The air grew thicker, hazier, tainted with pollutants that made his eyes water. The lift finally stopped at a platform marked 1782. Harry stepped off carefully, wand concealed but ready, his senses alert for any threat. This level was quieter than 1313 had been, the crowds thinner, the atmosphere more desperate than chaotic. A medical clinic, the bartender had said. Run by someone named Ashera. Harry found it after 20 minutes of searching, a modest storefront wedged between what appeared to be a machine shop and a closed business whose windows were boarded over. The sign above the door displayed text in multiple languages, but one phrase appeared in Basic, the common tongue he'd been hearing since arrival: Ashera's Hope Clinic, all species welcome. The interior was clean, well-lit, and crowded with patients. Harry saw beings of a dozen different species waiting on benches, some with visible injuries, others with illnesses he couldn't identify. A human woman in practical medical attire moved between patients with efficient compassion, scanning them with handheld devices, administering treatments, offering words of comfort in multiple languages. She was perhaps 40 standard years, with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun and eyes that assessed Harry the moment he entered. Those eyes missed nothing, not his burn-damaged jacket, not the way he favored his injured shoulder, not the carefully concealed wariness in his posture. "New patient," she said, not a question. "Take a seat. I'll get to you when I can." Harry sat, observing. The woman, Ashera, presumably, worked with the practiced skill of someone who'd seen every injury and illness Coruscant's lower levels could produce. She treated a Twi'lek child's broken arm with a Bacta-infused cast that molded itself to the injury. She prescribed medication to an elderly human man whose cough sounded terminal. She stitched up a Rodian's knife wound while lecturing him about avoiding gang territories. None of her patients paid. Harry noticed that immediately. Some offered credit chips that she accepted with a smile, but many had nothing, and she treated them regardless. This was charity medicine in a galaxy that apparently had little charity to spare. When she finally reached Harry, her examination was brisk and professional. Plasma burn, partially treated with an unknown substance. She ran a medical scanner over his shoulder, frowning at the readings. "The cellular regeneration is unlike anything in my database." "What did you use?" "A healing potion from my homeland," Harry said carefully. "I'm not local." "That's evident." She applied a salve that smelled medicinal and wrapped his shoulder with a flexible bandage that conformed to his skin. "You're also being hunted. I can see it in the way you watch the door, in how you position yourself with clear lines of sight to all exits." "Imperial?" Harry met her gaze, making a calculated decision to trust her, at least partially. "I arrived in this galaxy 3 days ago against my will. The Empire tried to imprison me. I escaped. Now I'm looking for people who oppose them." Ashara's expression didn't change, but something shifted in her eyes: calculation, assessment, decision-making happening behind a practiced mask of professional neutrality. Dangerous thing to say out loud, even here. The bartender at the Slippery Serpent suggested I find you. Mrek has a big mouth. But she smiled slightly. "Finish treating that wound twice daily with Bacta gel. Try not to get shot again. That'll be 50 credits, or whatever you consider fair payment." Harry pulled out another galleon. "I don't have local currency. Will this work?" Ashara's eyes widened at the sight of pure gold. She picked up the coin carefully, examining the moving engravings with fascination. "What is this?" "The metalwork is extraordinary. The weight suggests solid gold, but the animation." "Magic," Harry said simply. "Where I come from, we use magic the way you use technology here." "Magic." She rolled the word around her mouth like she was tasting something exotic. "The Force?" "Different. The Force seems to be internal energy, connected to life itself. Magic is external, we shape and direct it through will and knowledge." Harry paused. "I need to find the rebellion. I need allies who understand what the Empire is and are willing to fight it. Can you help me?" Ashera studied him for a long moment, and Harry could see her weighing risks against potential benefits, loyalty against pragmatism, hope against cynicism. He'd seen that exact expression on resistance fighters' faces during his own war, when they debated whether to trust a teenager who claimed he could defeat Voldemort. Finally, she stood and locked the clinic's front door, flipping a sign that indicated they were closed. "Follow me." She led Harry through the clinic to a back room filled with medical supplies, then to a concealed door disguised as a storage panel. Beyond was a narrow staircase descending deeper still into Coruscant's infrastructure. Harry followed, wand ready but not drawn, aware that he was committing to a path with no clear exit. The staircase opened into a hidden chamber carved from the structural foundations of the city planet itself. Inside, a dozen beings of various species worked at computer terminals, communication stations, and what appeared to be intelligence-gathering equipment. Maps of Coruscant's various levels covered one wall, marked with symbols and notations. Weapons were stacked in organized racks, blasters mostly, but also more exotic armaments. A rebel cell. Hidden in plain sight beneath a medical clinic. A Mon Calamari, fish-like humanoid with prominent eyes and salmon-colored skin, turned from one of the terminals, his expression sharp with intelligence and suspicion. "Ashera, who is this?" "Someone who claims to be from beyond the galaxy. Someone the Empire tried to capture. Someone who says he has power unlike the Force." She looked at Harry. "Demonstrate." Every weapon in the room suddenly pointed at Harry. He raised his hands slowly, non-threateningly, the Elder Wand clearly visible in his right hand. "I'm going to cast a spell now. It won't hurt anyone. It's just a demonstration of what I can do." "Proceed," the Mon Calamari said. "But if this is some Imperial trick. Expecto Patronum." Silver light erupted from Harry's wand, coalescing into the familiar form of a stag that had protected him countless times. The Patronus stood in the center of the chamber, majestic and translucent, radiating warmth and hope that pushed back against the underground room's oppressive atmosphere. It turned its head to regard the rebels with eyes that seemed impossibly alive for a spell construct. The chamber fell into stunned silence. "That's not the Force," someone whispered. "What is it?" "It's beautiful." Harry dismissed the Patronus with a gesture, and the silver light faded. "Magic. Where I come from, I'm called a wizard. I've fought in a war against darkness before, against a tyrant who believed in blood purity and used fear to control the population. I won that war, but at great cost." He met the Mon Calamari's eyes steadily. "I didn't ask to be in your galaxy. I don't know if I can get home. But I recognize tyranny when I see it, and I'm told you're fighting against the Empire. If that's true, I want to help." The Mon Calamari exchanged glances with Ashera, with several other rebels around the chamber. Silent communication passed between them, the language of resistance fighters who'd learned to trust carefully and verify constantly. "My name is Tol Vanda," the Mon Calamari said finally. "I lead this cell, one of many across Coruscant and the galaxy. We gather intelligence, conduct sabotage operations, extract people the Empire wants dead, and prepare for the day when we can actually challenge Imperial dominance openly." He gestured around the chamber. "We're small, poorly equipped, and outmatched by enemy forces 1,000,000 to 1. Most days, we consider it a victory just to survive." "I know the feeling," Harry said quietly. "If you truly have power independent of the Force, power the Empire doesn't understand and can't predict, you could be invaluable." Tol Vanda's large eyes studied Harry with disconcerting intensity. "But you could also be a liability. You've already been flagged by Imperial forces. The Inquisitors will be hunting you. Darth Vader himself might take interest if word reaches him about a new Force phenomenon. I can handle myself." "Can you?" Ashera interjected. "You got burned in a cantina brawl within hours of arriving on Coruscant. You don't understand our technology, our politics, our factions. You're a child stumbling through a war zone." The word stung because they were accurate. Harry forced down his defensive response and nodded slowly. "You're right. I need to learn. I need guidance. But I also have skills you don't, magical abilities that can accomplish things your technology can't. Invisibility that doesn't require cloaking devices. Healing that works instantly. Offensive spells that ignore armor and shields. Transportation methods that don't rely on ships or speeders. Demonstrate the invisibility, Tol Vanda ordered. Harry cast his disillusionment charm, watching the rebels' reactions as he vanished from sight. He walked silently around the chamber, tapping 3 different people on the shoulder, then reappeared behind Tol Vanda and dropped the charm. The Mon Calamari actually jumped slightly. Impressive. Our scanners didn't detect you at all. You bypassed every sensor and alarm we have installed. He looked at Ashera. This changes the tactical equation significantly. If we can trust him, she countered. I'll submit to whatever verification you require, Harry offered. Truth serums, lie detection, background investigation. Where I come from, I worked as an Auror, essentially magical law enforcement. I understand the need for security protocols. Tol Vanda considered this, then nodded slowly. We'll run our verification processes. In the meantime, you'll stay here, under observation. Ashera will provide quarters and basic orientation to our galaxy. If you prove trustworthy, we'll discuss how your abilities might be employed. He paused. But understand this, Harry Potter, the war we're fighting is not like whatever conflict you experienced in your universe. The Empire controls nearly everything. The Emperor himself is a Sith Lord of unimaginable power. His enforcer, Darth Vader, has killed more Jedi than perhaps any being in history. Against them, we're barely an annoyance. Your magic, impressive as it is, might not be enough. Harry thought of Voldemort, of the war that had cost so many lives, of standing in the Forbidden Forest accepting death because it was the only way to save everyone else. He thought of Dumbledore's fall, of Sirius disappearing through the veil, of Fred's body lying still among the rubble of Hogwarts. Maybe not, he agreed quietly. But I've faced impossible odds before. And I'm still here. Tol Vanda's expression softened slightly. Then welcome to the rebellion, wizard. May the Force, or whatever power guides you, be with us all. The rebel cell's hidden chamber became Harry's home for the next 3 weeks. It wasn't comfortable, a converted storage room with a cot, a small desk, and basic refresher facilities, but Harry had endured worse. The Dursleys cupboard under the stairs came to mind, as did the tent during the Horcrux hunt. At least here, people spoke to him with something approaching respect rather than contempt or fear. The verification process Tol Vanda had mentioned proved thorough and invasive. They'd scanned him with every technological device in their possession, searching for Imperial tracking devices, surveillance equipment, or biological markers that might identify him as a threat. They'd questioned him for hours about his background, his arrival, his capabilities, cross-referencing his answers for inconsistencies. Harry had answered honestly, holding back only the most dangerous secrets, the Horcruxes, the Deathly Hallow's full significance, certain spells that he judged too destructive to share. They had no truth serums equivalent to Veritaserum, but they did have something called a bioscan that measured stress responses, heart rate, and neural activity during questioning. Harry had passed, though the examiner noted his responses showed unusual patterns, possibly due to a clemency training that made his mental state difficult to read. Eventually, they'd concluded he was what he claimed, an outsider, genuine in his opposition to the Empire, and potentially valuable as an asset. Ashera had taken primary responsibility for his education about the galaxy, and Harry discovered she was an excellent teacher, patient, thorough, and willing to answer even his most basic questions without condescension. Through her, he learned the structure of galactic civilization, the history that had led to the Empire's rise, and the desperate circumstances of the rebellion's current position. The story was depressingly familiar. A democratic government, the Republic, had been manipulated and corrupted from within by a Sith Lord named Palpatine who'd engineered a war to justify emergency powers. He'd turned the Republic's own clone army against the Jedi Order in a galaxy-wide purge called Order 66. The few Jedi who survived went into hiding, hunted by Inquisitors and Vader himself. The Republic became the Empire, and freedom became a memory for most of the galaxy's inhabitants. It happened gradually, Ashera explained during one of their sessions, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd lived through the transition. First it was wartime restrictions. Then it was security measures. Then it was protection of imperial interests. Each step seemed reasonable in isolation, but together they added up to tyranny. By the time people realized what had happened, it was too late to resist openly. Harry understood completely. He'd watched the ministry of Voldemort's forces, had seen how quickly institutions could be corrupted when fear and prejudice were weaponized effectively. And the rebellion? He asked. How did it start? Slowly. Secretly. Individual cells forming independently, not even knowing others existed at first. Senator Bail Organa of Alderaan and Senator Mon Mothma of Chandrila were among the first to organize formal resistance, but they had to be incredibly careful. The Empire monitors everything: communications, travel, financial transactions. One suspicious move, and entire cells get wiped out. She pulled up a holographic display showing galactic sectors. We're spread across hundreds of systems now, but we're not unified. Each cell operates independently to prevent one capture from compromising the entire network. Toll's cell here on Coruscant focuses on intelligence gathering and occasional sabotage. Other cells run supply lines, extract refugees, or conduct direct military operations. What about military strength? Ships, soldiers, weapons. Ashara's expression turned grim. We're hopelessly outmatched. The Empire has thousands of star destroyers, millions of stormtroopers, and weapons capable of destroying entire planets. We have a few capital ships, scattered fighters, and volunteers who are brave but undertrained. Every victory costs us resources we can barely afford to lose, while Imperial losses are barely noticed against their overwhelming industrial capacity. It painted a bleak picture. Harry had fought in a war where his side was outmatched, but at least the wizarding world had roughly equal access to magic. Here, the power disparity was absolute. The Empire controlled the means of production, the supply chains, the infrastructure, everything that made organized resistance possible. Then how do you win? Harry asked. We don't. Not directly. Ashera deactivated the hologram. We survive. We inspire. We wait for the moment when the Empire's brutality becomes too much for the galaxy to tolerate, when enough systems join the rebellion that we can actually challenge Imperial control. It could take years. Decades. Most of us won't live to see it. She met his eyes. That's what you've signed up for, Harry. A war with no clear end, no promise of victory, and a high probability of death. Harry had heard similar speeches before, from Order of the Phoenix members, from Dumbledore himself. I didn't defeat Voldemort because victory was guaranteed. I did it because it was necessary. Because the alternative was letting darkness win. He stood, pacing the small room. But I'm not content to just survive and hope. There has to be a way to actually hurt the Empire, to undermine their control, to give people hope that resistance is possible. Like what? You're powerful, Harry, but you're one man with a stick that does impossible things. The Empire is everywhere. Then we need to make them afraid. Not of the rebellion's military might, you're right that we can't match that. But afraid of uncertainty. Afraid that their control isn't absolute. Afraid that something exists they don't understand and can't predict. Harry's mind was working now, drawing on lessons learned during the war against Voldemort. The Death Eaters controlled through fear, but they were also terrified of Dumbledore because he represented power they couldn't overcome. We need to create that same equation here. Ashera studied him thoughtfully. You want to become a symbol. A ghost story that undermines Imperial confidence. Not just me. The rebellion as a whole. But yes, magic gives us an advantage the Empire can't counter. They don't understand it, can't scan for it, can't prepare defenses against it. That's exploitable. Over the following days, Harry worked with Tol Vanda and other cell members to develop practical applications of magic for rebel operations. He demonstrated how disillusionment charms could bypass security systems that relied on visual sensors. He showed how a Patronus could deliver messages without any electronic signature that Imperial monitoring could intercept. He explained how memory charms, used ethically and carefully, could allow rebel operatives to hide sensitive information even under interrogation. The most valuable contribution proved to be his enchantment abilities. Harry spent long hours in the cell's workshop, applying protective spells to body armor that made it more resistant to blaster fire. He charmed communication devices with notice-me-not enchantments that made Imperial forces less likely to detect their signals. He even managed to create a magical equivalent to their sensor jamming technology by enchanting small stones with confusion charms that disrupted targeting systems. "This is extraordinary," Tol Vanda said, examining a piece of armor Harry had just finished enchanting. "Our armor can usually withstand 3 or 4 direct hits before failing. This absorbed 20 test shots without significant degradation. The enchantment draws on ambient energy to reinforce itself," Harry explained. "It won't last forever, maybe a few months before needing renewal, but it should significantly improve survival rates." "Can you enchant enough for the entire cell?" Harry considered the question honestly. "Not quickly. Each piece takes about an hour, and I can only maintain concentration for maybe 10 hours a day before exhaustion sets in. I could do, perhaps 8 or 9 sets a day. But there are more efficient applications. Instead of enchanting individual pieces, I could create a ritual space that temporarily enhances all equipment brought into it. The effect would be weaker but would cover more people." They decided on a hybrid approach. Critical equipment and armor for field operatives received full enchantments, while general supplies got the ritual enhancement. It wasn't perfect, but it was something, a marginal advantage in a war where margins often determine survival. Harry also began training select rebels in basic defensive tactics against Force users, based on his encounters with the Seventh Sister. "The Force grants precognition and telekinesis primarily," he explained to a group of 10 operatives during a training session. "That means Force users can sense your intentions and move objects without touching them. Traditional combat assumes your opponent can't read your mind or throw you across a room without moving. You need to adapt." He demonstrated with one volunteer, having them attack him repeatedly while he used minor telekinetic spells to mimic Force abilities. "Don't commit to attacks in straight lines, your intention telegraphs the movement. Feint, redirect, make your actual attack come from unexpected angles. Stay mobile, being thrown hurts less if you're already moving and can roll with it. And most importantly, use the environment. Force users are powerful, but they're not invincible. Explosives, ambushes, overwhelming firepower from multiple directions, these work." The training sessions were exhausting but productive. Harry found himself respecting these rebels, ordinary beings without magic or Force abilities, facing overwhelming odds, and still choosing to fight. It reminded him of the Dumbledore's army, of teenagers learning defensive magic because adults had failed to protect them, of people refusing to surrender even when surrender seemed rational. 3 weeks after joining the cell, Tol Vanda summoned Harry to the command center. The Mon Calamari's expression was serious, his large eyes reflecting the holographic displays around him. "We've received intelligence about an Imperial operation," he said without preamble. "There's a detention facility on the industrial moon of Wobani where political prisoners are held before transfer to more permanent installations. Standard processing procedure, interrogation, identification, categorization for either execution or labor camps." Harry's jaw tightened. He'd heard about these facilities during his orientation. Places where the Empire sent beings who'd spoken against the regime, who'd sheltered fugitives, who'd simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. "We've been monitoring their intake logs," Tol Vanda continued, pulling up a list of names and identification codes. 3 days ago, they processed a group captured during a raid on a safe house in the Atrevis sector. Among them, he highlighted one entry. A young human male, early 20s, identified as Luke Skywalker. Harry's breath caught. The Luke Skywalker? The one you told me about? The same. Son of Anakin Skywalker, who became Darth Vader. We'd been trying to recruit him, but he was hesitant, still processing the truth about his father. He got careless, and Imperial forces caught him during a supply run. Tol Vanda's expression was grim. If Vader learns his son is in custody, Luke is either dead or turned to the dark side. Neither outcome is acceptable. You want to extract him. We need to extract him. Luke represents hope for the rebellion in ways we can't fully explain. Call it destiny, call it the Force's will, call it practical necessity. He's powerful, he's connected to the Skywalker legacy, and he's capable of inspiring people in ways ordinary rebels can't. Tol Vanda met Harry's gaze. This is the kind of operation where your magic could make the difference between success and catastrophic failure. The facility is heavily guarded, full of sensors, with multiple redundant security systems. A conventional assault would cost dozens of lives and probably fail. But one invisible wizard with the ability to bypass physical barriers. Harry understood what was being asked. A solo infiltration mission into an Imperial prison facility to extract a high-value prisoner. Dangerous, possibly suicidal, exactly the kind of mission he'd run a dozen times during the war against Voldemort. What's the timeline? He asked. Luke is scheduled for transfer to a maximum security facility in 48 hours. After that, he'll be beyond our reach. So we move tomorrow night, during the facility's shift change when their manning is lowest. Tol Vanda pulled up schematics of the detention facility. These plans are 2 years old, so some details may have changed, but the basic layout should be accurate. Guard stations here, here, and here. Detention blocks arranged in a spoke pattern around a central command hub. Prisoner transfers processed through this loading bay. Harry studied the schematics, his tactical mind already working through approaches, contingencies, and escape routes. I'll need current information on guard rotations, sensor coverage, and any Force-sensitive personnel on site. If there's an Inquisitor stationed there. Our intelligence suggests the facility is considered low priority. Most personnel are standard security forces, no Inquisitors on permanent assignment. But that could change if they realize who they have in custody. Then we move fast. Harry looked up from the schematics. I'll go in invisible, locate Skywalker, extract him, and get to the designated extraction point. Your people provide external support and emergency backup if things go wrong. It's not that simple, Ashera interjected, entering the command center. She'd been listening from the doorway. Even if you successfully extract Luke, the Empire will mobilize everything within a sector to recapture him. The entire moon will be locked down within minutes of his escape being discovered. You'll need a ship capable of breaking through Imperial blockades, a pilot skilled enough to actually do it, and enough firepower to punch through pursuit. We have someone, Tol Vanda said. A smuggler we've used before. He owes us favors, and his ship is unconventional. Fast enough to outrun Imperial pursuit if anyone can. Harry nodded slowly, feeling the familiar weight of responsibility settling onto his shoulders. Another mission. Another life depending on his success. Another opportunity to either save someone or fail catastrophically. It felt like coming home, in the worst possible way. When do we leave? He asked. Tomorrow at dusk. Pack light, bring whatever magical supplies you think you'll need, and prepare for the possibility that everything goes wrong. Tol Vanda's expression softened slightly. Harry, understand, if you're captured, we can't extract you. If you're killed, we'll mourn you but we'll move on. This life doesn't offer guarantees or comfortable endings. I know, Harry said quietly. I've been fighting that kind of war since I was 11 years old. The journey to Wobani took 16 hours aboard a cramped transport vessel that smelled of recycled air and machine oil. Harry spent most of the trip reviewing the facility schematics, memorizing guard patterns, and preparing the magical supplies he'd need for the extraction. Pepper-up potion for sustained alertness. Did me for emergency healing. A handful of enchanted coins he prepared as emergency port keys, though he still wasn't certain they'd work across galactic distances without a proper anchor point. His invisibility cloak, carefully folded in an enchanted pocket. And the Elder Wand, as always, ready at his side. Ashera had insisted on accompanying the mission, despite Tol Vanda's objections. Someone needs to provide medical support if Luke's been injured or tortured, she'd argued. And someone needs to keep Harry from getting himself killed through noble self-sacrifice. I've read enough about his history to know that's a recurring pattern. Harry couldn't really dispute that assessment. Their pilot was a Celestin named Nian Nunb, short, jowled, with enormous eyes and a temperament that seemed far too cheerful for someone regularly running Imperial blockades. He spoke in a language Harry didn't understand, but Ashera translated the pilot's constant stream of commentary about engine performance, fuel efficiency, and his opinions on Imperial patrol patterns. He says we're approaching Wobani now, Ashera relayed as the ship dropped out of hyperspace. The moon is heavily industrialized, mostly prison facilities and processing plants. Imperial presence is significant but predictable. He can get us close to the extraction point without triggering alerts. Through the viewport, Harry saw Wobani materialize, a gray sphere pockmarked with massive industrial complexes that glowed with artificial light against the darkness. Even from orbit, it looked oppressive, a place built for function rather than any consideration of the beings who lived and died within its structures. The detention facility designated as their target sat on the moon's equator, a sprawling complex of interconnected buildings surrounded by perimeter walls and guard towers. Sensor arrays dotted the rooftop, tracking every vessel that approached the moon's surface. Harry counted at least 4 landing pads with Imperial shuttles prepared for rapid deployment. The shift change happens at 2200 local time, Ashera said, checking her chronometer. We have 40 minutes to get into position. Nian Nunb brought the transport down in a canyon 3 kilometers from the facility, settling the ship between rock formations that concealed it from casual sensor sweeps. The loading ramp lowered, and Harry stepped out onto Wobani's surface for the first time, immediately regretting it. The air was thin, cold, and tasted of industrial chemicals. His breath misted in front of his face. Lovely place, he muttered. Ashera handed him a compact communication device, small enough to fit in his ear. Keep this active. We'll monitor Imperial communications and feed you updates. If everything goes catastrophically wrong, we'll attempt a rescue, but don't count on it. Understood. Harry pulled out his invisibility cloak, the familiar silvery fabric catching what little light the moon's perpetual twilight provided. He wrapped it around himself, disappearing from sight. How do I look? Like nothing at all, Ashera confirmed. Their sensors won't detect you either, we tested that. But if you bump into someone or make noise, you'll still be noticed. Move carefully. Harry set off toward the facility, picking his way across the rocky terrain with practiced stealth. The cloak had hidden him from Death Eaters, from Voldemort himself, from creatures and beings across a dozen dangerous situations. It would hide him from stormtroopers. The perimeter wall was 5 meters high, topped with sensor equipment and what appeared to be automated defense turrets. Harry studied it for several minutes, identifying patrol patterns and blind spots in the sensor coverage. There, a gap where the wall joined one of the main buildings, probably a maintenance oversight that created a momentary dead zone. He waited for a guard patrol to pass, then cast a levitation charm on himself. The sensation of weightlessness was always slightly nauseating, but he rose silently over the wall and descended into the facility's courtyard. The cloak remained secure around him, and the sensors gave no indication they detected anything. I'm inside the perimeter, Harry whispered into his comm, moving toward detention block 3. Copy that, Ashera's voice crackled back. Be advised, we're detecting increased patrol activity near your position. Something might have spooked them. Harry froze, pressing himself against a wall as a squad of stormtroopers hurried past, their boots striking the permacrete in perfect synchronization. They weren't searching, they were responding to something specific. Harry followed at a careful distance, listening to their filtered communications. Possible security breach in Block 7. All units respond. Prisoner in cell 2187 is missing. Repeat, prisoner missing. Lockdown protocols initiated. Harry's blood ran cold. A prisoner was missing. Either someone else was running an extraction operation, or Luke had somehow escaped on his own. Either way, the facility was now on high alert, which made Harry's job exponentially more difficult. He abandoned stealth for speed, sprinting across the courtyard toward detention block 3 while still cloaked. The main entrance was sealed, a blast door lowered and locked, with 4 stormtroopers standing guard. Harry couldn't blast his way through without alerting the entire facility, and time was now a critical factor. The ventilation system. Every building had one, and they were rarely designed with magical infiltration in mind. Harry found an access grate on the building's exterior, cast a quick unlocking charm, and pulled it open. The shaft beyond was narrow, dark, and claustrophobic, but he'd been through worse. He climbed inside, pulling the grate closed behind him, and began navigating the facility's infrastructure by wand light. The ventilation system branched in multiple directions, a maze of metal tunnels that carried air, and apparently, sound, throughout the detention facility. Harry heard fragments of conversations, alarm klaxons, the mechanical hum of security systems activating. He oriented himself using the schematics he'd memorized, following the shaft that should lead to detention block 3 central corridor. After 10 minutes of crawling through increasingly tight spaces that reminded him uncomfortably of the Chamber of Secrets, Harry reached a grate overlooking a corridor filled with detention cells. He peered through carefully, counting guards, 6 visible, all carrying blaster rifles, all alert and clearly responding to the security breach. No sign of Luke Skywalker. "I'm in detention block 3, Harry whispered into his comm, multiple hostiles, no visual on the target. "Can you access the facility's prisoner logs remotely?" Static, then Ashara's voice, tight with concern. "Negative. Their systems are air-gapped from external networks for exactly this reason. You'll need to find a terminal inside." Harry scanned the corridor and spotted what he needed, a security station at the corridor's end, currently unmanned as the guards focused on cell-by-cell searches. He waited until the guards moved further down the corridor, then cast a silencing charm on the grate and pushed it open carefully. He dropped down into the corridor, still invisible, and moved silently toward the security station. The terminal was active, displaying prisoner manifests in a language Harry couldn't read. He pulled out his wand and touched it to the screen, concentrating. Aprio. A translation charm, imperfect but functional. The text flickered, reorganizing itself into English, or Basic, as the locals called it. He scrolled through prisoner listings rapidly, searching for Luke Skywalker's name. There, cell 2187, detention block 7. Not block 3. The schematics had been wrong, or the Empire had moved prisoners around. "Target is in block 7, cell 2187, Harry reported. "I'm relocating." "Negative," Ashara responded urgently. "Block 7 is where the breach was reported. The entire section is swarming with security forces. If you go in there now." "Then I go in there now," Harry interrupted. "We don't have time for subtle approaches. Skywalker's scheduled for transfer in less than 12 hours. This is our only chance." He didn't wait for Ashara's response, didn't want to hear the tactical analysis that would tell him this mission was rapidly approaching impossible. Instead, he moved back into the corridor, wand ready, and began making his way toward detention block 7 with considerably less caution than he'd shown entering the facility. Stormtroopers rushed past him twice, close enough that his cloak brushed against their armor. Harry held his breath both times, waiting for the shout of discovery that never came. The cloak's magic held, concealing him from sight and apparently from whatever sensors the stormtroopers' helmets contained. Detention block 7 was chaos. The blast door stood open, and inside, security forces were conducting cell-by-cell searches while prisoners shouted protests and demands. A supervisor, an officer in gray uniform rather than stormtrooper armor, was coordinating the search from a command position near the entrance. Impossible for a prisoner to escape without assistance. Someone opened that cell remotely. Find the accomplice. Surveillance shows nothing. The cell door just opened on its own. Then the surveillance system is malfunctioning. I want it checked immediately. Harry slipped past the arguing guards and into the detention block. Cell 2187 was indeed empty, its door standing open, no sign of how the escape had been accomplished. But there were scuff marks on the floor leading toward the block's rear exit, and those marks looked fresh. Someone had left in a hurry, heading deeper into the facility rather than toward the exits. Harry followed the trail, his aura training kicking in, the ability to read a scene, to understand what had happened through careful observation. Someone had freed Luke but hadn't let him out. That suggested either an imperfect escape plan or complications that had forced adaptation. Either way, Luke was somewhere in this facility, probably hiding, definitely in danger. The trail led to a maintenance corridor that connected Detention Block 7 to the facility's central processing area. Harry heard sounds ahead, running footsteps, the distinctive snap hiss of a lightsaber igniting, and then blaster fire. He emerged into a cargo bay just in time to see a young man, sandy-haired, wearing prisoner's gray, wielding a blue lightsaber with raw, untrained power, fighting desperately against 6 stormtroopers. The lightsaber deflected blaster bolts with wild swings that suggested more instinct than technique, but the boy was clearly overwhelmed, backing toward a corner with nowhere left to retreat. Luke Skywalker. Had to be. Harry dropped his invisibility cloak and acted without conscious thought. Protego Maxima. The powerful shield charm materialized between Luke and the stormtroopers, a translucent barrier of golden light that caught the next volley of blaster fire. The bolt splashed harmlessly against the magical shield, and the stormtroopers hesitated, clearly confused about what was happening. Luke spun toward Harry, lightsaber raised defensively, his eyes wide with shock. Who, what? Friend, Harry said shortly. We're leaving. Now. He didn't give Luke time to question further. Stupefy. Stupefy. Petrificus totalis. 3 stormtroopers went down under rapid spellfire. The remaining 3 opened fire on Harry's position, and he conjured another shield charm while simultaneously casting Expelliarmus. 2 blasters flew from their owner's hands. The 3rd trooper got off one more shot before Harry's stunning spell caught him in the chest. Silence fell over the cargo bay, broken only by the distant sounds of alarm klaxons and running feet. Harry turned to Luke, who was staring at him with an expression somewhere between awe and complete bewilderment. You're not a Jedi, Luke said. It wasn't a question. No. I'm a wizard. From very far away. And I'm here to get you out before Vader learns his son is in Imperial custody. Harry pulled the invisibility cloak from where he dropped it. Put this on. It'll make you invisible. Stay close to me and stay quiet. Luke's hand trembled slightly as he took the cloak. You know about Vader? About my father? I know enough. We'll discuss family drama later. Right now, we need to move before reinforcements arrive. Harry activated his comm, I have the package. Heading to Extraction Point Alpha. Be ready to fly the moment we're aboard. Copy that, Ashera replied. But Harry, be advised, Imperial forces are mobilizing across the entire moon. They're setting up checkpoints at all spaceport exits. Getting off-world is going to be problematic. It's always problematic, Harry muttered. He grabbed Luke's arm, or where Luke's arm should be under the cloak, and pulled him toward the cargo bay's exterior exit. Stay with me. Don't make noise. Don't drop the cloak. And if I tell you to run, you run and don't look back. I'm not leaving you behind, Luke said firmly, his voice carrying an edge of determination that reminded Harry uncomfortably of himself at that age. Let's hope it doesn't come to that. They made it halfway across the facility's grounds before the first pursuit patrol spotted the open cargo bay and raised the alarm. Searchlights swept across the courtyard, and Harry heard the distinctive sound of patrol speeders launching from their bays. Time had run out for stealth. "Run!" Harry commanded, breaking into a sprint with Luke beside him, invisible but audible, his footsteps slapping against the permacrete. They raced toward the perimeter wall as blaster fire began tracking their movement. Harry threw shield charms behind them without breaking stride, the spells absorbing incoming fire but draining his magical reserves rapidly. The wall loomed ahead, 5 meters of reinforced durasteel that might as well have been 50. Harry couldn't levitate them both, not reliably, not while running, not while maintaining defensive spells. But he could improvise. Bombarda. The explosion tore a hole through the wall's base, showering debris across the courtyard. Harry dove through the gap with Luke close behind, rolling across rough terrain and coming up in a sprint on the far side. Behind them, the facility erupted into full alert. Searchlights swept across the landscape. Patrol speeders cleared the wall and began systematic search patterns. And somewhere in that facility, someone was undoubtedly contacting Imperial Command to report that a prisoner had escaped with unexplained assistance. "Extraction point is 2 kilometers northeast," Harry gasped, his breath burning in the thin air. "Can you keep running?" "Yes," Luke said, and proved it by matching Harry's pace despite having been imprisoned for days. They ran through Wobani's rocky landscape, pursued by lights and the growing sound of pursuit vehicles. Harry's legs burned. His magical reserves were depleting rapidly. And he was beginning to realize that even if they reached the extraction point, getting off this moon was going to require either a miracle or the kind of desperate last stand he'd hoped to avoid. As if summoned by the thought, a figure appeared on a ridge ahead of them, tall, cloaked, holding a red lightsaber that ignited with a sound that sent chills down Harry's spine. The 7th sister had found them. "Keep running," Harry told Luke urgently. "Don't stop. Don't look back. I can fight." "No. You can't. Not against her. Get to the ship. I'll buy you time." Harry Potter stopped running and turned to face the Inquisitor, his wand raised, his magic burning through him like fire. He'd escaped her once. He'd have to do it again. Or die trying. The 7th sister descended the ridge with predatory grace, her red lightsaber casting crimson shadows across the barren landscape. Her yellow eyes fixed on Harry with recognition and something that might have been anticipation. Behind her, 3 Imperial patrol speeders crested the horizon, their searchlights converging on Harry's position. "The wizard," she said, her voice carrying clearly across the distance. "You've become quite the annoyance." Escaping from Ariadu was impressive. Infiltrating a detention facility and extracting a prisoner, that demonstrates either remarkable skill or suicidal stupidity. She gestured with her free hand, and Harry felt that invisible force grip attempt to seize him again. He was ready this time. Protego. The shield charm erupted around him, and the telekinetic assault slammed into the magical barrier with enough force to create visible ripples in both energies. The collision produced a sound like breaking glass, and both Harry and the 7th sister staggered slightly. "Interesting," she said, recovering her balance. "Your power can counter the force. But can it withstand both?" She lunged forward with enhanced speed while simultaneously hurling a massive boulder with telekinesis. Harry barely managed to dodge the physical projectile while deflecting her lightsaber strike with a hastily conjured shield charm. The red blade cut halfway through his magical defense before Harry rolled away, ending the spell and casting again. Stupefy. Incarcerus. Impedimenta. A rapid combination of spells that would have overwhelmed most opponents, but the 7th sister moved through them like water flowing around stones. Her lightsaber spun in defensive patterns, deflecting the stunning spell. The conjured ropes wrapped around empty air where she'd been a heartbeat before. The slowing curse caught her briefly, but she pushed through it with visible effort, the force lending her strength against magical impediment. The patrol speeders landed, disgorging stormtroopers who immediately opened fire. Harry conjured a circular shield charm around himself, creating a hemisphere of protection that caught blaster bolts from multiple angles. The sustained fire stressed the shield rapidly, too many simultaneous impacts, too much energy to absorb. Enough games, the seventh sister declared. She thrust both hands forward, and the force blast that struck Harry's shield was unlike anything she'd demonstrated before. The magical barrier shattered like actual glass, and Harry was thrown backward 20 meters, hitting the rocky ground hard enough to drive the air from his lungs. He rolled instinctively as her lightsaber came down where his head had been, the blade scoring the ground and leaving molten stone in its wake. Harry pointed his wand from his prone position. Expulso. The blasting curse caught the Inquisitor in the torso, detonating with explosive force that sent her tumbling backward. Harry scrambled to his feet, his body protesting every movement. His ribs ached, possibly cracked from the impact. Blood trickled from his nose. His magical reserves were dropping toward dangerous levels, and he still had to get off this moon alive. The stormtroopers were advancing, forming a perimeter that cut off escape routes. The seventh sister was already rising, her armor scorched but intact, her expression no longer anticipatory, now it was simply murderous. Harry made a decision born of desperation and tactical necessity. He pulled out 3 of his enchanted coins, emergency port keys he'd prepared weeks ago. He'd never tested them across galactic distances, had no idea if they'd work or simply tear him apart during transport. But staying meant capture or death, and he promised to buy Luke time to reach the ship. He threw 1 coin toward the advancing stormtroopers and activated it with a wordless burst of magic. The port key erupted in a massive explosion of disorienting energy that sent soldiers flying and created a crater 10 meters wide. Not the intended effect, port keys weren't supposed to explode, but the different physical laws of this universe apparently had opinions about dimensional magic. The second coin he hurled at the patrol speeders, with similar results. The explosion disabled 2 vehicles and sent the third careening out of control. The seventh sister's eyes widened fractionally, the first real emotion besides anger Harry had seen from her. "What are you?" "Desperate," Harry answered honestly. He held up the third coin, letting her see it clearly. "This one's calibrated to transport organic matter. Either it works and I disappear, or it explodes with both of us at ground zero. Your choice, let me leave, or we both find out what happens." For 3 heartbeats, they faced each other across smoking ground littered with stunned soldiers and destroyed vehicles. Harry's hand remained steady despite his exhaustion, the coin glowing faintly with unstable magic. The seventh sister's lightsaber hummed its threatening song, ready to strike if Harry showed any weakness. "Lord Vader will find you," she said finally. "He's already been informed about the wizard who wields power unlike the Force. He's already searching. And when he finds you," she deactivated her lightsaber. "Pray to whatever gods your universe acknowledges, because nothing in this galaxy will save you from his wrath." Harry didn't waste time responding. He activated the port key, felt reality twist impossibly around him, and then he was falling through a tunnel of compressed space that felt nothing like apparition or proper port key travel. Colors that shouldn't exist streaked past. His body felt simultaneously stretched and compressed. And then, abruptly, he was tumbling across rocky ground 3 kilometers away, retching from magical backlash and dimensional nausea. Through blurred vision, he saw Neon Nun's transport ship, loading ramp down, with Ashera waving frantically from the entrance. Luke Skywalker stood beside her, still wrapped in the invisibility cloak but visible now that Harry wasn't maintaining the charm. Harry forced himself to his feet and staggered toward the ship on legs that felt made of water. Behind him, he heard the distant sound of Imperial vessels converging on his previous position. They'd realize quickly that he'd escaped, would expand their search perimeter, would find this ship within minutes if they didn't leave immediately. He collapsed onto the loading ramp, and Ashera grabbed him under the arms, dragging him inside. "Get us out of here," she shouted toward the cockpit. Neon Nun's cheerful chirping turned urgent, and the ship's engines screamed to life. The ramp sealed as they lifted off, accelerating rapidly toward orbit. Through the viewport, Harry watched Wobani's surface recede as pursuit fighters launched from the detention facility. "They're targeting us," Luke said, his voice tight with tension. He'd moved to a gunnery station, his hands hovering over controls he clearly didn't fully understand. "For TIE fighters, incoming fast." The ship shuddered as laser fire struck their rear deflector shields. Warning klaxons blared. Neon Nun's piloting became violently evasive, throwing everyone not strapped in against bulkheads. Harry grabbed a support beam to avoid being flung across the cargo hold. "Can this ship fight?" Harry demanded. "Not well," Ashera answered, pulling herself into a seat and strapping in. "It's a transport, not a fighter. We're faster than TIEs in a straight line, but they're more maneuverable and better armed." More impacts shook the ship. The lights flickered. One of the deflector's shield indicators on the wall panel went from green to amber to red in rapid succession. Harry's mind raced through options. He couldn't cast spells at targets he couldn't see, couldn't affect enemy fighters that were outside his magical range. But he could affect their own ship. "Can you open the rear cargo door temporarily?" "What?" "We'll decompress. Just for 5 seconds. I have an idea." Ashera stared at him like he'd gone mad, but something in his expression must have convinced her. She shouted instructions to Neon Nun in his own language. The Celestin responded with what sounded like alarm chittering, but the cargo door began cycling open anyway. Atmosphere rushed out explosively. Harry braced himself against the support beam, wand raised, concentrating on one of the most difficult spells in his repertoire. Protego tot alum. Not a simple shield, but a complete protective barrier that sealed the cargo hold's opening while still allowing visibility. The magic strained against the vacuum of space, foreign physics trying to tear the spell apart, but Harry poured power into it and the barrier held. Through the transparent shield, he could see the pursuing TIE fighters clearly now, angular craft with distinctive solar panel wings, closing rapidly for another attack run. "Tell your pilot to maintain current speed and course," Harry instructed. "Make them think we're disabled." The TIE fighters took the bait, moving into formation for what was clearly intended as a kill shot. They closed to optimal firing range, their green laser cannons beginning to glow with charging energy. Harry waited until they were close enough to see clearly, then cast with everything he had left. Expulso Maximus. The blasting curse shot through his protective barrier, which he'd specifically designed to allow outgoing magic, and detonated among the TIE fighter formation with the force of a military-grade explosive. 2 fighters disintegrated immediately. A third spun out of control, its wing sheared completely off. The fourth managed to evade the worst of the blast but was clearly damaged, peeling away from pursuit with smoke trailing from its engines. Harry ended his protective spell and collapsed, completely exhausted. Ashera slammed her hand on the control to seal the cargo door properly, and atmosphere began cycling back into the hold. "That was insane," she said, staring at Harry with wide eyes. "That was incredible. That was the most reckless thing I've ever seen anyone do in space combat." "Did it work?" Harry managed to ask. "We're alive and the pursuit broke off," Luke answered, moving back from the gunnery station. He approached Harry carefully, offering a hand to help him sit up. "Thank you. For everything. For risking your life to extract me. For fighting that Inquisitor. For," he gestured vaguely at the sealed cargo door. "Whatever that was." Harry accepted the hand, studying Luke Skywalker properly for the first time. The young man had his father's features. Ashera had shown Harry holoprojections during his education sessions, but where Vader's images showed cruelty and corruption, Luke's face held determination and an almost painful earnestness. "You're welcome," Harry said simply. "Though I think you'd already started your own escape before I arrived. How did you get out of your cell?" Luke's expression became slightly embarrassed. I'm not entirely sure. I was meditating, trying to calm myself, and I felt something. The Force, I think. It was like the cell door's locking mechanism was a puzzle I could solve just by focusing on it. So I focused, and it opened. He shrugged helplessly. I'm still learning. Ben, Obi-Wan Kenobi, tried to teach me basics before he died, but I don't really know what I'm doing. You escaped an Imperial detention facility through intuitive Force use, Ashera said flatly. That's not knowing what you're doing. That's raw talent that would make most Force sensitives jealous. Or make Vader very interested in turning you, Harry added grimly. Which is exactly why the rebellion wanted you extracted. You're dangerous to the Empire's plans, Luke. Not just because you're powerful, but because you represent hope that the Sith haven't completely won. Luke sat down heavily on a cargo container, processing this. I never asked to be important. I just wanted to leave Tatooine, maybe become a pilot, see the galaxy. Now I find out my father is Darth Vader, the Empire wants me dead or converted, and apparently I'm supposed to be some kind of symbol for the rebellion. He laughed bitterly. Some destiny. Harry understood completely. He remembered being 11, learning he was famous, discovering that a psychotic dark wizard wanted him dead because of a prophecy. He remembered the weight of expectations, the burden of being the chosen one, the soul-crushing responsibility of other people's hopes. Destiny is what you make of it, Harry said quietly. I was told I was destined to either kill or be killed by the darkest wizard my world had ever known. That prophecy nearly destroyed me, nearly cost me everything I cared about. But in the end, it wasn't destiny that won, it was choice. My choices, my friends' choices, even my enemies' choices. Prophecies and destinies are just possibilities until someone decides to make them real. Luke met his eyes, and something passed between them, recognition, perhaps, of kindred spirits trapped in situations larger than themselves. How did you do it? Defeat your dark wizard? By dying, Harry answered honestly. And then choosing to come back. By accepting that some battles require sacrifice, but that sacrifice doesn't have to be meaningless. By having friends willing to stand with me even when victory seemed impossible. He smiled slightly. And by being more stubborn than darkness itself. That helped too. Nian Nun's voice chirped from the cockpit, and Ashera listened, then translated. We're approaching the hyperspace jump point. Once we make the jump, we'll be heading to a rebel rendezvous point in the Atravis sector. Should take about 8 hours. She looked between Harry and Luke. Both of you should rest. We'll debrief properly once we reach safety. Luke nodded and moved toward one of the crew bunks, exhaustion finally catching up with him. Harry remained where he was, too tired to move, his magical reserves completely depleted. He'd need hours of sleep before he could reliably cast even simple spells again. Ashera sat beside him, pulling out her medical scanner. You cracked 2 ribs, have a mild concussion, and your biometrics are showing signs of severe exhaustion. Whatever you did to make those TIE fighters explode drained you completely. Worth it, Harry murmured. We're alive. Luke's safe. Mission accomplished. Mission accomplished, Ashera agreed. But Harry, the 7th sister recognized you. She let you escape specifically so she could report to Vader. You've been officially flagged as a high-priority target. She met his eyes seriously. The Empire will be hunting you now. Not just local security forces, but Inquisitors, specialized tracking units, possibly Vader himself. Your life just became exponentially more dangerous. Harry thought about the 7th sister's final words, about the promise that Vader was already searching. He thought about facing another Dark Lord, another tyrant who'd corrupted an entire government and wielded power beyond ordinary comprehension. And he thought about Luke, young, untrained, filled with potential but vulnerable to exactly the kind of manipulation Voldemort had attempted on Harry himself. Let them hunt, Harry said quietly. I've been hunted before. I've been the target of Dark Lords and their followers, been marked for death, been the one person standing between evil and innocent lives. He looked at Ashera steadily. I didn't ask to be in this galaxy. I don't know if I can get home. But while I'm here, I'm not going to hide while the Empire terrorizes people. I'm not going to let Luke face Vader alone. And I'm sure as hell not going to let another Dark Lord win. Ashera smiled slightly, though her eyes remained concerned. You're either the bravest person I've ever met or the most suicidally reckless. Why not both? Harry suggested, and felt sleep pulling at him irresistibly. The last thing he saw before unconsciousness claimed him was stars stretching into lines as Neon Nun's ship jumped to hyperspace, carrying them away from Wobani and toward whatever came next in this impossible war. The rebel rendezvous point in the Atravis sector turned out to be a converted mining station orbiting a dying star. The facility was old, barely functional, and crowded with refugees, freedom fighters, and beings who'd lost everything to Imperial oppression. Harry found it simultaneously depressing and inspiring. These people had nothing, yet they continued resisting, continued hoping, continued fighting against impossible odds. The debriefing took place in what had once been the station's command center, now repurposed as a strategic operations room. Mon Mothma herself attended via hologram, her dignified presence filling the space despite being light years away. She listened to Harry's report about the Wobani extraction with careful attention, asking pointed questions about Imperial response times, security protocols, and the Seventh Sister's capabilities. Your magic represents an unprecedented tactical advantage, Mon Mothma said when Harry finished. The Empire has spent decades optimizing their defenses against Force users and conventional weapons. They have no framework for countering abilities that operate on entirely different principles. She paused, her expression thoughtful. However, you've also painted an enormous target on your back. Vader will prioritize eliminating or capturing you. Every Imperial asset in multiple sectors will be searching. I understand the risks, Harry replied. But I can't apologize for saving Luke. He was worth the exposure. I'm not asking for apologies. I'm stating tactical realities. Mon Mothma's hologram turned slightly, acknowledging Luke's presence in the room. Luke Skywalker, your extraction has been a priority for the Alliance since we learned of your potential. Your father was the greatest Jedi of his generation before his fall to darkness. If even a fraction of that power lives in you, properly trained and guided toward the light, you could become instrumental in our struggle. Luke shifted uncomfortably under the scrutiny. I don't know how to be what you need me to be. I've had maybe a week of actual training with Ben Kenobi before he died. Everything else is just instinct. Fumbling in the dark. Then we find you a teacher, Mon Mothma said. There are rumors of a Jedi Master who survived Order 66, living in exile on Dagobah. If he can be convinced to train you. No, the word came from Harry before he'd consciously decided to speak. Every eye in the room turned toward him. Sorry, but no. Luke doesn't need to disappear to some remote planet for years of training while the war continues without him. That's the old Jedi way, isolate Force sensitives, drill them in doctrine, strip away attachments until they're emotionally stunted warrior monks who can't connect with the people they're supposed to protect. The room went very quiet. Ashera looked alarmed. Tol Vanda's eyes widened. Even Mon Mothma's composed expression showed surprise at Harry's bluntness. You speak critically of the Jedi Order, she said carefully. Many in the Alliance revere their memory. I respect what they tried to accomplish, Harry said, moderating his tone but not backing down. But I've seen what happens when powerful organizations become dogmatic, when they prioritize tradition over adaptation, when they fail to evolve with changing circumstances. The Jedi Order fell because they were rigid, because they couldn't see the Sith threat literally sitting in their Senate, because they'd forgotten how to be human, or whatever species, beneath their robes and philosophy. He turned to Luke. You don't need isolation. You need practical experience, real-world application of your abilities, and most importantly, you need connections. Attachments. People you care about and who care about you. That's not a weakness, that's what gives power meaning. That's what prevents you from becoming like Vader. Luke looked between Harry and Mon Mothma's hologram, clearly torn between conflicting advice. What do you suggest instead? Train while fighting. Learn by doing. I can't teach you the Force, that's beyond my expertise, but I can teach you combat magic, tactical thinking, and how to use unconventional abilities in active conflict. We find other Force sensitives if possible, learn from holocrons or whatever knowledge repositories exist. But you stay engaged, stay connected to the people you're fighting for. Harry met Mon Mothma's gaze directly. The Empire wins if we hide our best assets away for theoretical future confrontations. They win if we fight their war on their terms. We need to be unpredictable, aggressive, and willing to take risks the old Jedi Council would have deemed inappropriate. Mon Mothma was silent for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of someone making difficult decisions with incomplete information. Your perspective is unconventional. Some would say dangerously so. But conventional approaches have yielded limited success against the Empire. She looked at Luke. The choice is yours, Luke Skywalker. Seek traditional Jedi training on Dagobah, or remain with active Alliance operations and learn through practical application. Either path carries risks. Luke didn't hesitate. I stay. I fight. I learn by doing. He glanced at Harry. Someone recently told me that destiny is what you make of it through choices. I'm choosing to stand with people who need help now, not prepare for some theoretical perfect moment that might never come. So be it. Mon Mothma's hologram flickered slightly. Then I'm assigning you both to Commander Vanna's Special Operations Unit. You'll conduct high-risk missions against Imperial infrastructure, targeting objectives where your unique abilities provide maximum advantage. Commander Vanna has experience integrating unconventional assets into tactical operations. The hologram shifted, and a new figure appeared, a human woman perhaps in her mid-30s, with short dark hair, a prominent scar across her left cheek, and the eyes that assessed Harry and Luke with the calculating gaze of someone who'd survived too many impossible missions. Commander Kaya Vanna, she introduced herself without preamble. I run Black Ops for the Alliance, the missions we don't officially acknowledge, the targets conventional forces can't touch, the operations where failure means everyone dies and nobody knows we tried. She studied Harry specifically. A wizard. I've been briefed on your capabilities. Impressive demonstration at Wobani, though your magical reserves appear limited. How many major spells can you cast before exhaustion? Harry appreciated the direct tactical assessment. Depends on the spell's complexity and power requirement. In sustained combat, maybe 20 or 30 significant spells before I need rest. Smaller utility magic I can manage almost indefinitely. Recovery time is 6 to 8 hours of sleep for full restoration. Limited but workable. Vanna turned to Luke. And you're a half-trained Force sensitive with raw power but minimal control. You can open locks intuitively and presumably deflect blaster bolts if you're holding a lightsaber, but no formal combat training or advanced Force techniques. Luke bristled slightly at the assessment but nodded. That's accurate. Good. Self-awareness prevents fatal overconfidence. Vanna's expression was all business. Here's how this works. I give you mission parameters, you execute using whatever methods you deem appropriate, you survive, you report back. I don't care about orthodox tactics or following regulations. I care about results and keeping my operatives alive. Questions? What's our first mission? Harry asked. Vanna pulled up a holographic display showing a massive Imperial facility, a star destroyer under construction in orbital drydock, surrounded by defensive platforms and patrol routes. The Empire is building a new class of super star destroyer at the Fonda shipyards. It's intended as Vader's personal flagship, 20 kilometers long, bristling with weapons, capable of projecting Imperial power across entire sectors. Intelligence suggests it's 60% complete and scheduled for launch in 8 weeks. She zoomed in on the ship's internal structure. Destroying it conventionally would require a full fleet assault we can't afford. But if someone could infiltrate the construction site and sabotage critical systems, say, the reactor containment or the hyperdrive motivator, we could either destroy the ship or delay its completion by months. Harry studied the schematics, his tactical mind already working through approaches. What's the security situation? Extreme. Orbital defense platforms, constant patrol sweeps, ID verification at every checkpoint, internal security droids, and a permanent garrison of stormtroopers. Plus, there are rumors that Inquisitors are stationed on site specifically because Vader is paranoid about rebel infiltration. Vanna met his eyes. This is a suicide mission by conventional assessment. That's why I'm giving it to you. Your magic makes the impossible merely extremely dangerous. I can't apparate, that's magical teleportation, to locations I haven't physically visited, Harry said, thinking through limitations. And my invisibility cloak, while perfect against visual detection, might not fool technological sensors designed to detect life signs or heat signatures. Then we get you close enough to physically infiltrate. We've got a supply freighter scheduled to deliver construction materials to Fonder in 4 days. We can hide you in the cargo, shielded containers that block sensor scans. Once you're on site, you'll have maybe 6 hours before someone realizes the freighter's cargo manifest doesn't match actual delivery and starts investigating. 6 hours to infiltrate a Star Destroyer under construction, sabotage critical systems without being detected, and escape before security locks down the entire facility. Harry smiled grimly. I've had worse odds. Luke stepped forward. I'm coming with you. No, Harry and Vanna said simultaneously. You're too valuable to risk on a mission this dangerous, Vanna continued. You're also untrained and would be a liability in close-quarters infiltration where stealth is paramount. I can help, Luke insisted. My force abilities could detect security forces before they detect us. I can use the lightsaber if we're discovered. And, he hesitated, then continued, I need to do this. I need to prove I'm more than just a symbol or a prophecy. I need to actually fight. Harry understood the sentiment completely, the desperate need to be useful, to contribute, to be more than a passive piece in someone else's game. He'd felt exactly the same way at Luke's age, probably younger. But he also understood that good intentions didn't prevent people from dying on missions they weren't prepared for. Compromise, Harry suggested. Luke comes, but he follows my lead absolutely. No heroics, no improvisation without my approval, no taking initiative unless I'm incapacitated. This isn't about proving yourself, it's about completing the mission and surviving. Can you accept those terms? Luke met his gaze steadily, and Harry saw the stubborn determination he recognized from his own mirror reflections. Yes. I follow your lead. Vanna looked between them, clearly calculating risks and benefits, then nodded slowly. Fine. You're both on the mission. But understand, if this goes wrong, if you're captured or killed, the Alliance will disavow any knowledge of the operation. You'll be abandoned assets, and nobody will risk additional resources on rescue attempts. Her expression softened fractionally. That's not cruelty. That's operational necessity. We can't afford to expose our network for individual operatives, no matter how valuable. Understood, Harry said, having heard similar speeches from Moody about dangerous order missions. When do we leave? Tomorrow morning, station time. Use the next 24 hours to prepare equipment, rest, and plan your approach. I'll have detailed intelligence packages delivered to your quarters within the hour. Vanna's hologram began to flicker as the connection prepared to terminate. And Potter? Try not to die. Good wizards are apparently harder to find than competent force users. The hologram disappeared, leaving Harry and Luke alone with Tol Vanda and Ashera in the command center. The Mon Calamari looked concerned, his large eyes reflecting genuine worry. This is extremely dangerous, even by Alliance standards, he said quietly. Vanna's unit has a casualty rate that approaches 70%. Most operatives don't survive more than 3 or 4 missions. Then we'll have to be in the 30% who do, Harry replied. He turned to Luke. Get some rest. We'll start planning in a few hours, once I've reviewed the intelligence packages. Luke nodded and left, his young face set with determination that reminded Harry painfully of Ron and Hermione heading into the Department of Mysteries, into battle, into situations where they might die because they believed in him and the cause he represented. Once they were alone, Ashera approached Harry, her expression troubled. You're taking responsibility for keeping Luke alive on a mission where survival is questionable. That's a heavy burden. I've carried heavier, Harry said, thinking of the Horcrux hunt, of leading Dumbledore's army, of walking into the Forbidden Forest to die so others might live. Besides, someone has to teach him that heroism doesn't mean unnecessary sacrifice. Someone has to show him there's a difference between dying for a cause and living for one. And if the mission fails? If he dies because you brought him along? Harry was quiet for a long moment, remembering Cedric's death, feeling the familiar weight of guilt that never entirely faded. Then I'll live with that guilt, just like I've lived with all the others. But I'd rather give him the chance to fight, to choose his own path, than keep him locked away safe while others die in his place. That's not protection, that's a different kind of prison. Ashera studied him with those perceptive eyes that seemed to see past his composed exterior to the scars beneath. You're older than you look, aren't you? Not in years, maybe, but in experience. In loss. War does that, Harry said simply. It ages you in ways that have nothing to do with calendars. He left the command center and made his way through the converted mining station's cramped corridors toward the quarters he'd been assigned. Along the way, he passed refugees huddled in makeshift shelters, saw children playing games with improvised toys, watched rebel soldiers cleaning weapons with the careful attention of people who knew their lives depended on equipment maintenance. These were the people he was fighting for. Not abstract concepts like freedom or justice, but actual living beings who deserved lives not dominated by fear and oppression. It made the mission real, made the risks worthwhile, made the possibility of death acceptable if it meant protecting them. Back in his quarters, Harry found the promised intelligence package waiting, a datapad filled with schematics, security protocols, guard rotation schedules, and detailed analysis of potential sabotage targets. He spent hours memorizing every detail, planning contingencies, preparing for every scenario he could imagine. And when exhaustion finally forced him to sleep, he dreamed of falling through space, of red lightsabers cutting through magical shields, of yellow eyes promising that Darth Vader was coming. He woke before dawn, if such concepts had meaning on a space station, and began preparing for the mission that would either cripple the Empire's newest weapon or end his life trying. Either way, Harry Potter was done running. Done hiding. Done being passive in a galaxy that desperately needed people willing to stand against darkness. The war had found him. Now he was bringing the war to the Empire. The supply freighter Distant Promise was a rust bucket that smelled of industrial lubricants and decades of neglect. Harry and Luke spent the 4-day journey to Fonda hidden inside a shielded cargo container designed to block sensor scans, cramped, uncomfortable, and utterly dark except for Harry's wand light. They used the time productively, with Harry teaching Luke basic combat principles that translated across magical and force-based fighting. Power without control is just destruction, Harry explained, demonstrating a precise cutting charm that severed a ration bar into perfectly equal pieces. You have raw strength, I felt it when you were deflecting blaster fire at Wobani, but you're using it like a hammer when you need a scalpel. Luke practiced with his lightsaber in the confined space, the blue blade humming dangerously close to the container walls. Ben told me the Force flows through all living things, that I needed to trust my instincts. But my instincts nearly got me killed a dozen times. Instinct is your foundation, not your entire structure. You build on it with training, experience, and most importantly, tactical thinking. Harry pointed his wand at Luke's lightsaber. Expelliarmus. The disarming charm shot forward, and Luke's weapon flew from his hand before he could react. Harry caught it with a summoning charm. See? Raw power didn't help you there. You need to anticipate threats, read your opponent's intentions, and react before their attack fully develops. They drilled constantly in that dark container, Luke learning to sense Harry's spellcasting before the magic manifested, Harry teaching him how to use the Force to predict enemy movements. It wasn't traditional Jedi training, wasn't what Obi-Wan would have taught, but it was practical education forged in the reality of active combat. When the freighter finally docked at Fonder's orbital construction facility, Harry and Luke were ready. They waited in darkness as cargo handlers unloaded containers around them, listening to muffled voices discussing shipment manifests and construction schedules. Hours passed. Finally, their container was moved, loaded onto an automated transport, and delivered deep into the construction site. Harry cast a silent unlocking charm on the container's interior seal. They emerged cautiously into a massive hangar bay filled with construction equipment, assembly droids, and materials for building the Superstar Destroyer. Through the bay's observation windows, Harry saw the ship itself, an impossibly massive wedge of gray metal that dwarfed everything around it, still incomplete but already terrifying in its scale. "Stay close," Harry whispered, casting disillusionment charms on both of them. They became near invisible, blending with their surroundings as they moved through the construction site. Luke's Force senses guided them away from patrol routes and security checkpoints, his abilities complementing Harry's magical stealth perfectly. The intelligence package had identified the ship's reactor core as the optimal sabotage target, catastrophic if properly disrupted, impossible to repair without months of reconstruction. They navigated through kilometers of corridors and construction spaces, bypassing security through a combination of magic, Force abilities, and careful timing. Harry's tactical planning carried them through 3 security checkpoints, the first bypassed by levitating themselves through air ducts, the second overcome with a carefully timed distraction spell that drew guards away from their posts, the third simply waited out as patrol routes created temporary gaps in coverage. They reached the reactor level 4 hours into their infiltration. The space was cavernous, dominated by the massive reactor core that would power this Superstar Destroyer across the galaxy. Technicians worked on scaffolding around the structure, making adjustments and installations that would take weeks more to complete. Security droids patrolled in predictable patterns, their sensors sweeping for unauthorized personnel. Harry studied the reactor's design through his magical senses, feeling the latent energy contained within its structure. It reminded him oddly of the magical cores in ancient artifacts, concentrated power waiting to be released, stable only through careful containment. If that containment was disrupted. "I need 15 minutes, Harry whispered to Luke. "Keep watch. If anyone approaches, warn me immediately." He approached the reactor core's main control panel, his wand tracing complex patterns as he analyzed the technology. Magic and science weren't as different as people assumed, both followed rules, both involved energy manipulation, both could be understood through careful study. Harry had never sabotaged a starship reactor before, but he'd disabled dark artifacts, had disrupted curse-sustained enchantments, had even damaged a Horcrux containment field. The principles translated. He began casting a series of highly specific spells, each one designed to subtly corrupt the reactor's containment field protocols. Not obvious damage that would be immediately detected, but cascade failures that would manifest gradually over the next few hours. The reactor would appear stable until it reached operational capacity, at which point the compromised containment would fail catastrophically. The Empire would get their Superstar Destroyer. They'd load it with personnel, arm it with weapons, celebrate its completion. And then, when Vader himself boarded his new flagship, the reactor would detonate with enough force to vaporize everything within 1,000 kilometers. It was brutal. It was ruthless. It was the kind of tactic Harry had spent most of his life avoiding because it felt too much like something Voldemort would do. But this wasn't his world, and these weren't innocent people. This was a weapon designed specifically for planetary subjugation, and everyone aboard it would be complicit in the Empire's tyranny. War forced impossible choices. Harry was learning that lesson all over again. "Harry," Luke's urgent whisper interrupted his concentration. Someone's coming. 3 people, and one of them feels wrong. Dark. Cold. Harry's blood went cold. Inquisitor. Had to be. He finished the final spell sequence hastily, hoping he hadn't made errors in his rush, then moved away from the control panel. We need to leave. Now. They retreated through the reactor level's maintenance corridors as voices echoed from the main entrance. Harry caught fragments of conversation, something about unauthorized energy signatures, sensor anomalies, heightened security protocols. Their infiltration hadn't been as undetected as he'd hoped. There. A shout from behind them. Blaster fire scorched the corridor walls, forcing Harry and Luke to abandon stealth for speed. They sprinted through the construction site as alarms began blaring throughout the facility. Blast doors started closing, sealing off sections to contain potential intruders. Harry blasted through one closing door with an explosive curse, the detonation drawing even more attention. Security forces converged from multiple directions. Luke's lightsaber ignited, deflecting blaster bolts with increasingly confident movements as his force-enhanced reflexes took over. They burst into a launch bay where small maintenance craft sat ready for deployment. Harry seized Luke's arm and ran for the nearest ship, a compact shuttle designed for short-range transport between the construction site and nearby stations. "Can you fly this?" Harry demanded. "I can fly anything," Luke replied with perhaps more confidence than the situation warranted. He threw himself into the pilot's seat while Harry covered their backs, casting shield charms that absorbed incoming fire. The shuttle's engines roared to life. Launch bay doors remained sealed, but Harry was beyond caring about subtle approaches. Reducto. The blasting curse struck the bay doors with concentrated force, and while it didn't destroy the massive structure, it damaged the locking mechanisms enough that Luke could force the doors open through sheer repulsor thrust. They shot out of the construction site into open space, immediately drawing the attention of every defensive platform and patrol ship in the vicinity. TIE fighters launched in pursuit. Turbolaser batteries opened fire, filling space with lethal energy. Luke's piloting was instinctive and brilliant. He wove between incoming fire with impossible precision, the force guiding his hands faster than conscious thought could manage. The shuttle wasn't designed for combat maneuvering, but under Luke's control, it moved like a starfighter. "We need to jump to hyperspace," Luke shouted over the sound of proximity alarms. "But we can't plot coordinates while evading. I need time." Harry moved to the shuttle's rear compartment where emergency equipment was stored. No weapons, but there were magnetic grapples designed for retrieving space debris. Not ideal, but Harry had worked with worse. He opened the rear hatch. Vacuum didn't affect him while he maintained a magical atmosphere shield around himself, and aimed his wand at the pursuing TIE fighters. The distance was extreme, far beyond normal spell range, but Harry poured power into his casting. Accio. The summoning charm, amplified to maximum strength, reached out across the void. It couldn't pull entire starfighters to him, they were too massive, too fast, but it could grab smaller components. Like solar panel wings. The spell latched onto a TIE fighter's port wing and yanked, throwing the vessel into an uncontrolled spin that sent it careening into 2 other pursuers. 3 ships destroyed with one spell. Harry felt grim satisfaction despite his exhaustion. More TIE fighters closed in. Harry cast again, using banishing charms to hurl debris into their flight paths, blasting curses to create explosive hazards, even a Patronus that momentarily distracted pilots unprepared for impossible silver constructs in vacuum. "Got it!" Luke shouted. Hyperspace in 3, 2, 1. The stars stretched into lines, and they vanished into hyperspace just as a turbolaser blast would have vaporized their shuttle. The sudden silence after sustained combat was almost shocking. Harry sealed the rear hatch and collapsed against the bulkhead, his magical reserves dangerously depleted once again. Luke emerged from the cockpit, his face flushed with adrenaline and triumph. Did it work? The sabotage? We'll find out in a few days when the reactor either holds or catastrophically fails during power-up tests. Harry managed a tired smile. Assuming I didn't make any mistakes while being rushed. You didn't, Luke said with surprising confidence. I felt it through the Force. Whatever you did to that reactor, it's going to work. They sat in silence for several minutes, processing the mission's success and their improbable survival. Finally, Luke spoke quietly. I killed people back there. Deflected blaster bolts back at the soldiers shooting at us. I felt them die through the Force. Harry understood the weight in Luke's voice. The first kill was always the hardest, left scars that never fully healed. It doesn't get easier, he said honestly. Taking a life, even in war, even in self-defense, costs something. You lose a piece of your innocence each time. The trick is not letting it consume you, not becoming numb to it. How do you prevent that? You remember why you're fighting. You hold on to the people you're protecting. You refuse to become the evil you're opposing, even when it would be tactically advantageous. Harry met Luke's eyes. And you accept that war requires impossible choices, but that doesn't make those choices easy or right. It just makes them necessary. Luke processed this, his young face showing the beginning of wisdom that came from confronting harsh realities. Ben always talked about the light and dark sides of the Force like they were absolute. You had to be one or the other, no middle ground. But that's not how the real world works, is it? In my experience, absolute moral certainty is usually dangerous. The darkest wizards I fought believed absolutely in their righteousness, in blood purity, in their right to rule. They couldn't see nuance or compromise. Harry paused. But I've also seen what happens when people abandon all principles in pursuit of victory. There has to be a line, fluid, contextual, but present, that you refuse to cross. The moment you decide anything is justified if it wins the war, you've already lost what you were fighting for. What's your line? Harry thought of the Deathly Hallows, of standing in the Forbidden Forest accepting death because sacrificing himself was acceptable but sacrificing others wasn't. Innocent lives. I won't sacrifice innocence for tactical advantage, won't torture prisoners for information, won't use dark magic that corrupts the caster even if it would be effective. He gestured toward the ship's rear, toward Fonda now light years away. That reactor we sabotaged? It will kill people when it fails. But those people chose to serve the Empire, chose to build weapons of oppression. That's different from targeting civilians or using methods that destroy your own humanity. It's a thin line. Yes. And maintaining it is harder than abandoning it. But that's what separates us from Vader, from the Emperor, from the darkness we're fighting against. The shuttle's navigation computer chimed, indicating approach to their extraction coordinates. Vanna had arranged a rendezvous with a rebel frigate that would transport them back to the mining station. The mission was over. They'd survived. The Empire's Super Star Destroyer was compromised, likely to destroy itself and everyone aboard during its maiden voyage. It should have felt like victory. Instead, Harry felt the familiar weight of war, the knowledge that success was measured in lives taken, in destruction caused, in compromises made with principles that had once seemed absolute. He'd fought this kind of war before, had won through sacrifice and determination and stubborn refusal to surrender. But that war had ended. He'd gotten to go home, to rebuild, to find peace. This war had no clear end. No prophecy promising eventual victory. No guarantee that any of them would survive to see the Empire fall. Just endless missions, impossible odds, and the hope that enough small victories might eventually add up to meaningful change. The rebel frigate appeared on their sensors, transmitting recognition codes that identified them as allies. Luke brought their stolen shuttle into the frigate's hangar bay with practiced ease, setting down gently despite never having piloted this type of craft before. Commander Vanna was waiting as they disembarked, her scarred face showing rare approval. Clean infiltration, successful sabotage, 0 casualties on our side. Well done. She gestured for them to follow her toward the debriefing room. Intelligence confirms the reactor containment is compromised. Imperial engineers are currently baffled about why their diagnostics show green across all systems while their independent analysts are detecting subtle anomalies. They'll figure it out eventually, but not before the damage becomes catastrophic. How many people will die when it fails? Luke asked quietly. Vanna's expression hardened. Approximately 40,000 crew and construction personnel, plus whoever happens to be visiting when it happens. That bothers you? Yes. Good. The day you stop being bothered by death tolls is the day you've lost your humanity. Vanna stopped at the debriefing room entrance. But don't let guilt paralyze you. Those 40,000 chose to serve an empire built on slavery, genocide, and systematic oppression. Their deaths prevent the oppression and death of billions more. The math is ugly but clear. She entered the debriefing room, leaving Harry and Luke to follow. Inside, holographic displays showed updates from across rebel operations, successful raids here, devastating losses there, the constant ebb and flow of a war being fought in shadows across 1,000 systems. And on one display, a priority message that made Harry's stomach drop, Imperial Priority Alert, Darth Vader personally investigating Fonder incident. Additional Inquisitors dispatched to a Travis sector. Extreme caution advised. Vader knew. He'd connected the Wobani extraction to the Fonder sabotage. He was hunting now, personally, with the full resources of the Empire backing him. Vanna noticed Harry's attention on the message. He's coming for you specifically. Imperial intelligence has classified you as a level 1 threat, the same category as confirmed Jedi Masters and major rebel leadership. You've officially become one of the most wanted beings in the galaxy. Harry thought of the Seventh Sister's warning, of yellow eyes promising that Vader would find him. That promise was being kept. How long until he locates this facility? Harry asked. Days, maybe weeks if we're lucky. The mining station isn't registered in any official database, and we've taken precautions against tracking. But Vader is persistent. He has resources and abilities we don't fully understand. Vanna's expression was grim. The leadership is discussing evacuation protocols and dispersing assets to prevent complete network exposure. Luke stepped forward, his jaw set with determination. Then we need to stop running. We need to face him. You're not ready, Harry and Vanna said simultaneously. Maybe not. But I'm Anakin Skywalker's son. If anyone has a chance of reaching whatever humanity might still exist inside Vader, it's me. And if we keep running, keep hiding, we're letting him dictate the terms of this war. Luke looked at Harry. You taught me that war requires impossible choices. This is mine, face my father and either redeem him or die trying. Harry saw himself in Luke's expression, the same stubborn determination, the same willingness to sacrifice, the same naive belief that love and hope could overcome darkness. Part of him wanted to protect Luke from that kind of confrontation, to prevent the trauma that would come from facing a corrupted parent. But he'd also learned that preventing people from making their own choices, even dangerous ones, was just another form of control. Not yet, Harry said finally. Not until you're actually ready. Vader will kill you in seconds if you face him now. But, he looked at Vanna. We train him. Intensively. Everything we can teach about combat, tactics, force application, and surviving against superior opponents. And when he's ready, truly ready, we stop running. Vanna studied them both with those calculating eyes that had seen too many young idealists die pursuing noble causes. You're both insane. But insanity seems to be a prerequisite for success in this war. She pulled up mission files on the holographic display. Fine. We've got 3 weeks before the Empire likely locates this station. We use that time to prepare. And then we see if a wizard and a half-trained Jedi can actually survive confronting the galaxy's most powerful Sith Lord. Harry felt the familiar weight of destiny settling around his shoulders once more, the sense that events were converging toward an inevitable confrontation that would determine far more than just his survival. He'd walked this path before, had faced dark lords and impossible odds and emerged victorious through sacrifice and determination. But this wasn't his world. This wasn't his prophecy. This wasn't his destiny. It was Luke's. And Harry's role was to make sure the young man survived long enough to fulfill whatever fate the Force had in store. The 3 weeks that followed were the most intensive training period Harry had experienced since his Auror Academy days. Commander Vanna brought in every resource the rebellion could spare, combat instructors, retired military tacticians, even a former Imperial officer who defected and knew Vader's fighting style intimately. The converted mining station's cargo bay became a makeshift training ground where Harry and Luke pushed themselves to exhaustion daily, then woke the next morning to do it again. Harry taught Luke everything he could translate from magical combat to Force application. The principles were remarkably similar. Both required focus, intention, and the ability to react faster than conscious thought. Where Harry cast shield charms, Luke learned to create force barriers. Where Harry used summoning charms to manipulate objects at range, Luke practiced telekinesis with increasing precision. Where Harry relied on spells for offense, Luke developed his lightsaber technique into something approaching actual competence. Again, Harry commanded, sending a stunning spell at Luke from an unexpected angle. Luke's lightsaber came up instinctively, deflecting the magical energy in a shower of sparks. Better. But you're still reacting rather than anticipating. Feel the attack before it manifests. The Force should warn you. Luke closed his eyes, centering himself as Ben Kenobi had taught him. Harry waited 3 heartbeats, then cast. Luke's blade intercepted the spell precisely, his movement confident rather than desperate. "That's it," Harry said, genuine approval in his voice. "Now maintain that awareness while moving. Combat doesn't happen in stationary meditation." They sparred constantly, Harry using non-lethal spells while Luke practiced with training sabers that stung rather than severed. Slowly, incrementally, Luke's raw power transformed into controlled skill. He learned to use the Force not as a blunt instrument but as an extension of his senses and will. His precognition sharpened until he could predict Harry's attacks with unsettling accuracy. His telekinesis became precise enough to pluck individual components from complex machinery. But technical skill wasn't enough. Vader was more than just a powerful Force user, he was a psychological weapon, someone who used fear and intimidation as effectively as his lightsaber. Harry brought in Ashera to help with that aspect, using her medical knowledge to explain trauma responses and how to maintain emotional control under extreme stress. "Vader will target your attachments," Ashera explained during one session. "He'll threaten people you care about, use your emotions as weapons against you." The traditional Jedi response was to eliminate attachments entirely, no family, no romantic connections, no deep friendships. That prevented emotional vulnerability but created different problems. "What's the alternative?" Luke asked. "Acknowledge your attachments but don't let them control you," Harry said, thinking of his own struggles during the war. "I cared deeply about my friends, would have died for them, nearly did die for them. But when it mattered most, I was able to function despite that fear because I'd accepted that some things were worth the risk of loss." Luke struggled with this concept. He was young, passionate, prone to emotional intensity that reminded Harry of himself at that age. But gradually, through repeated exercises and simulated scenarios where Ashera and others played different roles as psychological pressure points, Luke learned to feel deeply while still maintaining tactical focus. The other critical element was understanding Vader himself. The former Imperial officer, a man named Terex who'd served under Vader for 2 years before defecting, provided insights that were simultaneously invaluable and horrifying. "Vader is patient," Terex explained, his voice carrying the weight of trauma barely contained. "He'll let you think you have advantages, let you believe you're winning, right until the moment he closes the trap. He uses Form V lightsaber combat, aggressive, powerful, designed to overwhelm opponents through sheer kinetic force. His strength in the Force is," Terex paused, searching for words. "Imagine standing at the base of a mountain and trying to push it over through will alone. That's what challenging Vader feels like. How do you beat someone like that? Luke asked. You don't. Not directly. You survive long enough to exploit weaknesses. Terex pulled up holographic recordings of Vader in combat, footage salvaged from security systems, showing the Dark Lord destroying Jedi survivors with terrifying efficiency. His armor is his vulnerability. It's life support, keeping him alive after catastrophic injuries. Target it correctly, and you compromise his physical capacity. His breathing apparatus, the control panel on his chest, the respirator on his back, these are critical points. Harry studied the recordings carefully, noting movement patterns, reaction times, and the way Vader used his environment as part of his attacks. The Dark Lord was formidable, but he wasn't invincible. He relied heavily on intimidation and the assumption that opponents would be too terrified to fight effectively. That psychological weapon could be turned around. If they could maintain composure and refuse to be intimidated, they might survive long enough to matter. There's something else, Harry said, noticing a detail in the recordings. He's aggressive, but there are moments of hesitation. Brief pauses before killing blows, instances where he seems almost conflicted. Terex nodded slowly. I noticed that too during my service. He's absolutely ruthless with most enemies, but occasionally something would trigger a response that seemed almost human beneath the monster. Nobody understood what caused it. Nobody dared ask. Luke leaned forward, his expression intense. What if there's still something of Anakin Skywalker inside him? What if the man my father was isn't completely gone? Then that's an exploitable weakness, Vanna interjected, her tactical mind immediately recognizing the strategic value. Psychological warfare cuts both ways. If Vader has internal conflicts about his past identity, confronting him with elements of that past might disrupt his focus. Or enrage him beyond reason, Terex countered. I've seen what happens when someone mentions Anakin Skywalker in Vader's presence. It doesn't end well for that person. The debate continued, but Harry filed the information away. Luke's desperate hope that his father could be redeemed was both his greatest strength and potentially his most dangerous vulnerability. If Luke was right, they might have a chance. If he was wrong, that hope would get him killed. As the third week drew to a close, Imperial activity in the Atravis sector intensified dramatically. Rebel intelligence reported increased patrol frequencies, systematic searches of potential hiding locations, and the arrival of Vader's personal flagship, not the sabotaged Super Star Destroyer, which had indeed exploded catastrophically during its power-up test, killing 43,000 Imperial personnel, but his previous command ship, the Executor. He's close, Vanna said during the final mission briefing. Maybe hours away from locating this station. We're evacuating non-essential personnel and dispersing critical assets across multiple locations. But, she looked at Harry and Luke. We've also received intelligence about an opportunity. Vader's deployed most of his support forces to search operations, leaving his flagship with minimal escort. If someone was crazy enough to board the Executor directly, confront Vader on his own ship, they might catch him isolated from overwhelming backup. That's not an opportunity, Ashera said flatly. That's assisted suicide. Maybe, Vanna agreed. But it's also the kind of impossible mission that defines this war. Conventional tactics won't defeat Vader. Conventional forces can't match his power. But a wizard who operates outside every tactical framework the Empire understands, supported by Vader's own son who might exploit psychological vulnerabilities, she shrugged. It's insane. But it might work. Harry met Luke's eyes across the briefing table, seeing his own determination reflected there. They'd trained for 3 weeks. They'd prepared as thoroughly as time allowed. They were still almost certainly going to die if they attempted this. But they'd also learned through hard experience that impossible odds were just another challenge to overcome through skill, determination, and willingness to risk everything. We do it, Harry said quietly. We end this. One way or another. The plan was simple because complex plans rarely survived first contact with reality. A small stealth ship would deliver Harry and Luke to the Executor's docking bay. They'd infiltrate using Harry's invisibility cloak and Luke's force abilities to avoid detection. They'd find Vader, probably in his meditation chamber or command center. They'd confront him. And either they'd survive or they wouldn't. The journey to the Executor took 6 hours, piloted by Nian Nun, who seemed almost cheerful about the suicidal nature of the mission. Harry spent the time in meditation, conserving his magical reserves, preparing mentally for what was probably his final battle. Luke sat across from him, lightsaber resting on his lap, his young face showing remarkable calm for someone about to face his corrupted father. "Are you afraid?" Luke asked suddenly. Terrified, Harry admitted honestly. "But fear is just information. It tells you the stakes are real, that consequences matter. The trick is not letting it paralyze you. I keep thinking about my aunt and uncle on Tatooine. Simple moisture farmers who wanted nothing to do with the Empire or the rebellion or any of it. The Empire killed them because of me, because I existed." Luke's hands tightened on his lightsaber. "How many more people die because I'm too weak to stop Vader?" Harry recognized the guilt, the desperate need to believe personal action could prevent tragedy. You can't take responsibility for the Empire's actions. You didn't kill your aunt and uncle, Imperial stormtroopers did. Vader didn't become a monster because you existed, he made choices that led him down that path long before you were born. He paused. "But I understand the need to do something, to take action rather than passively accepting circumstances. That's why we're doing this." The Executor appeared on their sensors, a massive star destroyer that dwarfed even the super weapons Harry had seen during the war. 25 kilometers of weaponized intimidation, bristling with turbo-laser batteries and fighter bays, surrounded by a minimal escort that still consisted of more firepower than most rebel fleets could muster. Nian Nun's piloting brought them through the defensive perimeter using stolen Imperial codes and a flight path that suggested they were a returning reconnaissance vessel. The docking bay accepted them without challenge, automated systems guiding them to a landing pad among dozens of other small craft. Harry wrapped both himself and Luke in his invisibility cloak, the familiar silver fabric settling around them like a protective embrace. They disembarked into the Executor's interior, cold, sterile, utterly imperial in its oppressive functionality. Stormtroopers marched past in perfect formation. Officers consulted data pads with bureaucratic efficiency. Droids performed maintenance with mechanical precision. And somewhere in this massive ship, Darth Vader waited. Luke's force senses guided them through kilometers of corridors toward a presence he described as cold darkness that pulls at everything around it like a black hole. They avoided patrols, bypassed security checkpoints, and penetrated deeper into the ship's restricted sections where only command personnel and Vader's personal forces had access. The meditation chamber's doors were sealed, but Harry's unlocking charm opened them silently. Inside, a spherical chamber with a single throne faced massive viewports showing the void beyond. And in that throne, silhouetted against stars, sat the most terrifying figure Harry had ever seen. Darth Vader was massive, over 2 meters tall, encased in black armor that incorporated life support systems into intimidation. His breathing was mechanical, rhythmic, the sound of a machine keeping a broken body alive. His helmet concealed his face completely, reflecting only smooth black surfaces that gave no hint of humanity beneath. And around him, the Force itself seemed to bend, compress, twist into patterns of darkness and controlled rage that made Harry's magical senses scream warnings. The throne rotated slowly, and Vader faced them despite the invisibility cloak. "I sense you," his voice emerged through a vocabulator, deep and utterly devoid of natural human inflection. "The wizard who disrupts my empire's operations." And, the helmet tilted slightly toward Luke. Another presence. Familiar. Impossible. Harry dropped the invisibility cloak, wand raised, every defensive spell ready at his fingertips. Luke stepped forward, activating his lightsaber, the blue blade casting harsh shadows in the dimly lit chamber. "Hello, Father," Luke said, his voice steady despite facing the galaxy's most feared being. "We need to talk." For 3 heartbeats, absolute silence filled the meditation chamber. Then Vader rose from his throne with mechanical precision, his own lightsaber igniting in a snap hiss that promised violence. The blade burned crimson, the color of the dark side, of blood, of corrupted kyber crystals forced into service. "My son," Vader said, and beneath the vocabulator's mechanical inflection, something that might have been emotion flickered. "You should have remained hidden. Now you will join me or die." "There's a third option," Harry said, his wand level, his magic singing through his blood. "You let us leave. You question the Emperor you serve. You remember who you were before darkness consumed you." Vader's helmet turned toward Harry, and even through the featureless mask, Harry felt the weight of absolute focus, predatory attention from something far more dangerous than any enemy he'd faced before. "You will not leave this ship alive," Vader pronounced, and then he moved. The duel that erupted would be spoken of in whispers for generations, the wizard and the would-be Jedi standing against the Dark Lord of the Sith in his own domain, magic and force colliding in combinations the galaxy had never witnessed. Harry's spells carved the air with light. Luke's lightsaber sang its deadly song. And Vader's raw power pushed against them like a physical force, testing their limits, seeking weaknesses, waiting for the inevitable moment when they would fail. The battle raged through the meditation chamber, into corridors beyond, across platforms that overlooked the Executor's vast interior. Each exchange pushed them closer to exhaustion, closer to the moment when skill would falter and power would overwhelm. And through it all, Harry saw something in Vader's movements: hesitation, brief pauses before killing strikes, moments when the Dark Lord's focus seemed divided between destroying his enemies and something else entirely. Luke saw it too, and he spoke between exchanges, voice carrying across the clash of lightsabers and spellfire. "I know you're still in there, Father. I know Anakin Skywalker isn't completely gone. Please, fight the darkness. Come back to the light." And for just a moment, Darth Vader's lightsaber wavered, his mechanical breathing hitched, and the fortress of darkness around him cracked just slightly. That moment was enough. Not for victory, they couldn't defeat Vader, couldn't kill him, could barely survive against him. But enough for possibility. Enough for hope. Enough for a choice. The confrontation in Vader's meditation chamber didn't end with decisive victory or tragic defeat. Instead, it ended with a stalemate, Harry and Luke escaping through desperate magic and force abilities while Vader stood motionless, staring at the space where his son had been moments before. Word spread through the rebellion: the wizard and Skywalker's son had faced Vader and survived. The Empire's invincible enforcer had hesitated. Darkness wasn't absolute. Victory, however distant, was possible. Harry Potter remained in the Star Wars galaxy, unable to find his way home but no longer seeking it desperately. He'd found purpose here, found people worth fighting for, found that his skills could make impossible differences in an impossible war. Luke Skywalker continued his training, growing stronger, wiser, preparing for the day he would face his father again, not to destroy him, but to save him. The war continued. Battles were won and lost. Lives were saved and sacrificed. But something fundamental had changed: hope, that most powerful and dangerous force, had been rekindled. And in distant shadows, Darth Vader stood alone in his meditation chamber, mechanical breathing echoing in darkness, remembering a name he tried to forget: Anakin Skywalker. The Force stirred with possibility.